I have created scientific magic. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 51. Since boarding the sailing warship, Lin En has been thinking about what identity he should use to enter the land of wizards. A disciple of Kalu, a wizard apprentice who has only practiced magic for half a year? If he takes on this identity, it is obvious that he will encounter countless troubles. You must know that everyone on the sailing warship has seen how he casts spells, not to mention the explosion in the harbor town, which is definitely not something a small apprentice can do. As the saying goes, a man is innocent, but he is guilty of holding a treasure. A weak person with a big secret will usually become the target of someone with a heart. Their identities at the moment are also very embarrassing. They were hunted down by the Holy See all the way, fled to the land of wizards like a stray dog, and destroyed a very important route. It is not surprising that they were detained and interrogated directly after arriving at the port of Yaita. So if you want to break the situation, you must change. Thinking of this, Lin En looked at Johnny and asked, "Do you know why the teacher risked being arrested and went to the capital of the Duke of Nordland?" The teacher said that the second daughter of the Duke of Nordland has a good talent for magic. Johnny paused, then spoke with certainty. "And we don't have enough money." Lin En's mouth twitched involuntarily. He knew that Kalu must have some ulterior motive for recruiting these noble children. It seems that he was looking for research funds. Of course, in addition to this, there is a second reason, that is, the nobles are basically literate and have good qualities, so they don't have to teach everything from scratch. Learning magic itself is also a very expensive thing. For example, a copy of Red Fire Embers, that releases fireballs, requires 1 silver and 37 coppers, which is enough for a poor family to save money for a month. Magic is not something that poor people can learn. Maybe Kalu still has the idea of training 1 or 2 noble wizards in his mind. Although these apprentices are not the first heirs, they don't have the opportunity to create their own. Lin En did not continue to think deeply, but shook his head and refuted. "These are just cover-ups. Have you heard of the secret society?" "What is that?" Johnny looked confused. "This is a very secret wizard organization in the Sekka's Empire, which brings together many big names. When my teacher taught me magic, I had the honor of having some contact with people from the secret society." Lin En said nonsense. Kalu's teaching process was very casual. He would take each apprentice with him for a period of time, and then throw them to a safer place to let them practice magic on their own. In other words, during the time when Kalu taught him alone, only the two of them knew everything that happened, and Johnny had no way to expose his words. "After I came into contact with the Secret Law Society, my teacher told me that many of the research theories in the wizarding land were outdated outside and completely out of date. So my teacher compiled a secret research manuscript in private and planned to go to the capital of Nordland to meet with a colleague from the Secret Law Society. If this operation fails, I will take this precious research manuscript back to the wizarding land at all costs." In a few words, Lin En changed their identities from stray dogs who fled to the wizarding land to avoid the pursuit of the Holy See and accidentally destroyed an important route, to the heroes who obeyed the instructions of their mentor Kalu, went through untold hardships, avoided the heavy blockade of the Holy See, and sent a research manuscript containing important information to the wizarding land. As long as the weight of this research manuscript is heavy enough and the news it brings is explosive enough, they will not be blamed, but may be rewarded. "Is this the case?" Johnny looked confused. Kalu had never told her about the secret society, and Lin En's expression didn't seem to be joking. "So you got the method to become a formal wizard through the secret society?" Johnny said thoughtfully. "You can say that, but my situation is more special, and this method doesn't apply to others." Lin En nodded and didn't correct the misunderstanding. "In the wizard land, only formal wizards have a certain status and the ability to protect themselves, which is also in line with the lowest evaluation of his strength by everyone on the ship. If he doesn't want to cause trouble, he must be a formal wizard whether he wants to or not." While answering, Lin En was also thinking about the contents of the research manuscript in his mind. According to Johnny's description over the past few days, the wizard land's understanding of the world is roughly equivalent to the level of the Renaissance in Western Europe. As long as he comes up with a slightly more cutting-edge theory, it will be enough to make these wizards drop their jaws. Due to the existence of magic, wizards are very biased. Although they have made great achievements in the microscopic field, learned about the existence of gravity early, and created an alchemical ship powered by steam, most wizards still believe in the flat earth theory and believe that the continent under their feet is the center of the entire universe. They even used this continent as a reference to draw the orbit of each planet in the galaxy, forming a unique star theory. Lin En had seen the so-called star movement map in Kalu's research manuscript. The entire continent was suspended in the void, surrounded by a solid magic barrier. Then the sun and the moon moved in a circle around the continent, and the other celestial bodies moved in a specific trajectory, forming an extremely complex geometric pattern, which is also in line with the description of the Holy See in the Genesis of the Bible. However, he has talked with Loud and others in the past few days. This world also has a solar eclipse phenomenon, and the towering mountains and towers are seen first when sailing on the sea. In addition, as long as the movement of the celestial bodies in the star map is slightly changed, and the stars are placed in the center, everything becomes familiar again. It can be seen that the creationism of the church is completely nonsense. Ella can't be so confused that he can't even figure out whether he created a continent or a sphere. Of course, this kind of wrong cognition is a pit that almost every civilization has to fall into. To put it bluntly, it is the so-called common sense that constrains the mind. When a person is just born, he always thinks that he is the protagonist, and everything needs to exist around him. The continent under his feet must be a very special existence in the vast universe and the center of the entire universe. However, after in-depth research, you will find a very cruel thing. Let alone planets, even the entire galaxy is insignificant to the vast universe. Attacking the flat earth theory as a starting point is undoubtedly a good choice. It is not only shocking enough, but also has too much evidence to prove the fallacy of this argument. Just tear off the shackles of common sense. Without him saying much, those wizards will naturally realize what is correct. Lin En is also ready to use this to test the scientific research atmosphere of the wizard land. In the face of doubts, whether to carefully verify and accept the truth, or to suppress those voices that do not conform to the mainstream, this will determine his future actions. Thanks to the book Friend, I can't think of a name for the 1542 starting coins. I'm so lonely with you for the 600 starting coins. The old man in the moonlight, silent reading, can't extricate himself for the 100 starting coins. The wind is rising age for the 12 starting coins. Like a dream for the 8 starting coins. The leader of the speculation group for the 6 starting coins. And a little fantasy for the 2 starting coins. Chapter 52. This is probably just a farce. After finalizing the follow-up action plan, Lin En looked at Johnny again and said, although we have successfully escaped the pursuit of the Holy See this time, we have also destroyed a very important route. When we arrive at the port of Yaida, we may be blamed. I will explain it to you then. Johnny realized that they seemed to have caused a big disaster, and his heart was suddenly uneasy. But seeing that Lin En was extremely calm, he felt a little relieved. Next, the two of them thought about the troubles they might encounter after entering the port of Yaida, and roughly discussed the countermeasures. Until the end, Lin En hesitated for a moment and spoke again. By the way, from now on, you should call me Lin En. This is a new pseudonym I came up with. Since you have become a wizard, it is better not to continue using your past identity, so as not to implicate your family in the future. The huge sailing warship drifted on the sea for a full half-month before it finally got out of the fog. The outline of a huge island at the end of the line of sight had already appeared. Hurry up, work harder, we are almost there. The Aida harbor is ahead. Lord shouted loudly, and the sailors on the ship also gathered their strength. No one wanted to stay in the damn fog. At this moment, Lin En was standing on the deck and looking into the distance. As the hull gradually approached, the port city in front was clearly visible. However, several patrol boats cruising on the sea nearby soon surrounded them. These ships looked very strange. They looked relatively flat overall. There was no strange pole on the hull, nor were there big and tall sails. Instead, there was a tube erected on the cabin of the hull, and smoke was coming out. Steamship? Lin En looked at it with interest, and Lord on the side explained it when he saw that he was interested. These alchemy ships are unique to the wizard land. They are much faster than the sailing warships under our feet, and are not easily affected by strong winds. As he spoke, the sailing warships slowly approached the shore under the escort of several alchemy ships. The sailors skillfully lowered the rudder and planks, and a wizard in a cyan robe was already waiting at the dock. "Long time no see, Theodore, my old friend." Lord strode off the ship, hugged the wizard enthusiastically, and then turned around and pointed at the two people behind him and introduced them. "This is Mr. Lin En and Miss Johnny. It's really rare. No foreign wizards have set foot here for a long time." Theodore's scrutinizing eyes stayed on the two people for a long time before he spoke. "But welcome to Yaiata Harbor. I believe you will fall in love with this place in no time." "Thank you for your kind words, Mr. Theodore," Lin En responded humbly, and Johnny saluted respectfully. Theodore made a few simple polite remarks and then looked at Lord again. "By the way, old cripple, why did you come in person this year? And you drove a sailing warship. What happened?" If he hadn't used the alchemy eyepiece to find Lord standing on the deck, the magic crystal cannon placed in the port would have been launched long ago. "I'm afraid the matter is more complicated than you think. We need to meet Master Helrim to explain the situation in person," Lord said solemnly. Hearing Lord's serious words, Theodore's smile immediately withdrew and frowned. "Master Helrim is not in the academy now, so I'll take you to find him." Lord also knew the process, and before leaving, he specifically asked all the sailors to stay on the ship and wait for the review. Since the distance was not far, the few people did not take a car, but followed Theodore on foot into the city. The inner city of Yaiata Harbor was completely different from the scene in the Empire. The black road surface was clean and flat. The streets were wide enough to accommodate 3 carriages running at the same time. The rows of white-walled and red-roofed buildings were scattered in an orderly manner, and even the trees and flowers on the street were trimmed very standardly, revealing a strong Western classical style. Although Johnny and Lord had also been to the wizard land, they were still very shocked when they revisited it again. Lin En almost thought that he had traveled through time again. If the people of the Sekaz Empire were still living in the evil Middle Ages, then the wizard land had quickly jumped to the 17th and 18th centuries. "Oh, look over there, how about it? Isn't it beautiful?" Walking on a stone road leading to the depths of the city, Theodore pointed to a large fountain and a group of sculptures of various shapes in the city, and introduced them very complacently. The entire Yaiata Harbor was designed by Master Raphael, who is also the most famous master of architecture and sculpture in the entire wizarding land. Then he must have obsessive-compulsive disorder. Lin En secretly complained in his heart. All the buildings in the entire Yaiata Harbor are neat and tidy, and there is no difference between the left and right sides. If there is a decorative flower bed on one side, there must be another identical flower bed on the other side. However, after seeing the scene in the city, Lin En also understood why most wizards would rather stay in the wizarding land. Anyone who has experienced such an environment would not be willing to return to the dirty, messy, and smelly Sekaz Empire. Along the way, Theodore introduced everything about Yaiata Harbor to several people in a boastful tone, from the road surface to the architectural design, and even the materials used to make each sculpture, and then admired the expressions of surprise and shock on everyone's faces. Whenever someone from outside the wizarding land arrives here, he always feels a strong sense of superiority in his heart. Lin En looked around this unique seaport city with great interest, his eyes sweeping over every building. He had only seen such ancient architectural style in black and white photos in the database. At the same time, he couldn't help but feel a little puzzled. Aren't there too few people on the street? After entering the inner city, the number of people they saw did not exceed 100. Just as he was thinking, there was suddenly a burst of noise and clamor in front of him. Lin En looked ahead and found that the huge square inches the center of the city was already crowded with people, and there seemed to be a trend of more and more people gathering. "Is there any celebration today?" Lin En asked with a little curiosity. Theodore opened his mouth, hesitated, and finally shook his head. saying helplessly, "No, it's probably just a farce." Chapter 53 The Girl Who Longed to Fly to the Sky. That group of halflings must be doing something new again, Theodore sighed, and then led a few people through the dense crowd. Lin soon saw the noble status of the wizard. After seeing the badge on Theodore's chest, the extremely crowded harbor residents spontaneously made way for an aisle. A few people quickly squeezed to the front and saw the scene in the center of the square. On the smooth stone brick road was a huge aircraft about 2 meters high and with a wingspan of nearly 7 meters. No, it would be inappropriate to describe it as an aircraft, because it looked a bit too simple. It was just a frame built of wood and steel, with cowhide ropes tied tightly at the joints, and then a layer of camel leather canvas was laid on the frame. It looked like a monster hovering on the ground, flapping its wings, causing the people watching around to exclaim continuously, "It's so big!" Johnny looked at the aircraft in amazement, and the whole person was shocked beyond words. "Is this a new alchemical device invented in the wizard land?" "Of course not." Theodore patted his forehead and turned his face away, not daring to look at it. He just hoped that he would not be too embarrassed in front of outsiders this time. Lin En felt it was very interesting. He didn't expect to encounter such a strange scene just after entering the Yaita harbor. "Is this a test flight?" Lin En saw the propeller hanging on the double-layer wing at a glance. "However, if it is only powered by steam, I'm afraid the result will be worrying." Although he thought so, Lin En still stared at the aircraft. Every attempt of mankind to fly is worth boasting, not to mention that this world has the existence of magic, so nothing is impossible. Hey, just thinking about it. Lin En saw a young figure climb to the top of the aircraft neatly, tied the last connection point with a cowhide rope, and then sat directly in the cabin. She looked only 8 or 9 years old, wearing a dirty and dusty short robe. Her hair was messy from the wind, her face was stained with dust, her sleeves and trouser legs were tied up, and she wore a large windproof goggles on her head. Her whole body was full of energy and enthusiasm. "So young, why did you choose a child to fly this aircraft?" Lin En asked in surprise. "No, you are wrong. Lydia is a halfling. In fact, she is 16 years old this year," Theodore explained. "Is that so?" Lin En took a closer look and found that the girl's ears were slightly pointed, and her pupils and hair color were also a little special. It is actually difficult to distinguish between halflings and ordinary humans in childhood, and the other party's face looked very young, so he didn't recognize her at all. "Lydia, why don't we just forget it?" At this time, several halflings were doing the final maintenance work in front of the aircraft in the square. One of the halflings, who looked very old, put his hands on the fuselage of the aircraft and shook it vigorously for a few times, as if testing the sturdiness of this thing. Of course, if it falls apart, that would be even better, so that the other party would have to give up this unrealistic fantasy. "Don't worry, Uncle Darren, I have made all the preparations this time, and it will definitely work." The girl named Lydia slapped the other party's hand that was making trouble, pulled the windshield on her head hard, put her hand on the controller, and said confidently, "Okay, I'm going to leave. You all should disperse quickly." "But you said the same thing last time." The halflings complained silently in their hearts, but still hid away, mainly because they also felt that it was a very embarrassing thing to gather here, and it would be even more embarrassing later. And although those wizards didn't say it on the surface, they must have objections to them occupying the city square and causing such a big mess. With bursts of smoke pouring out from the top of the fuselage, the steam power drove the propellers on both sides to start rotating. After everyone in front dispersed and made way, Lydia pulled the wrench, using the straight street as a runway, and the huge aircraft rushed straight forward. "Can this thing really fly?" Johnny was extremely curious. Of course, she could see that this thing was used to take off. From the appearance, it looked like a very large bird. It should be able to, but it is likely to only fly a little bit. Lin En did not sense the fluctuation of magic power throughout the whole process. He had already encountered the fate of this thing. Johnny was confused. What did it mean to only fly a little bit? Theodore shook his head. He felt that this thing could not fly at all. Independent flight is the patent of high-level wizards. Except for the Griffin Knights trained by the Secus Empire, no one can soar freely in the sky. Under the attention of everyone, The speed of the huge aircraft became faster and faster, rushing through the city square. On the opposite street, a long and large ramp was erected to provide a height difference. Lydia was extremely nervous, and her pupils under the goggles stared at the front. When the aircraft rushed to the top of the ramp, the girl pressed the controller hard, and the aircraft shook its huge wings violently like a bird, and flew directly over the ramp with the last lift. It actually flew up. Theodore was completely confused, with an expression of disbelief on his face. The civilians who were also watching this scene were also shocked. "Oh my God, she really did it. Lydia is worthy of being called handy. It's amazing. I bought the gadgets she made. They are as magical as the wizard's magic tools. She will definitely pass the selection this year." The halflings below were even more excited. They danced and cheered loudly. Lydia is the pride of the halflings. She will definitely become the first halfling wizard. However, they celebrated too early. After the aircraft took off with the help of thrust, countless problems were exposed. Lydia was happy about the successful launch and adjusted her course, intending to fly around the Iata harbor, but after just a few seconds, she found that her aircraft had lost balance and was falling rapidly. Lydia hurriedly pulled the wrench, trying to control the wings to swing up and down, imitating the flying of a bird to provide lift. But unfortunately this only made things worse. The flight trajectory of the aircraft immediately became distorted, like a dragon hit by magic, spinning and falling from midair. P.S. This book is updated twice a day. Don't say I'm a one-update party anymore. The update time is 12:30 noon. The update may be slower during the new book period, so that I can stay on the new book list for a while, and add more updates when it is put on the shelves. In addition, I ask for everything for the new book. Thanks to bookfriend 150404210531420 for the reward of 1,500 Kidian coins. Bookfriends 201909170714578184 and Brother Yalong for the reward of 200 Kidian coins. Bookfriends 202107312206250099, Da Naok, Ye Care Dream, and Nanyi 13 for the reward of 100 Kidian coins. Only Eternal Death for the reward of 4 Kidian coins. What nickname should be called? Kill Yesterday's Sorrow, Nanchansi Yi, and Heartfelt Cans for the reward of 2 Kidian coins. Chapter 54, Great Wizard Helram. I knew it would be like this. Seeing the aircraft falling from the sky, Theodore couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief, and then complained in a low voice, "Master Helram shouldn't have indulged her like this." Lin En stared at the sky. The huge aircraft was shaking in the air, and the direction of the fall was exactly this square. However, the people gathered in the square did not have any panic on their faces, so Lin En gave up the idea of taking action, and it seemed that there should be someone to clean up this mess. Sure enough, just when the aircraft was about to fall to the ground, several wizards in the square took action, and released the slow fall spell together, allowing the aircraft in the air to land smoothly in the center of the square. But the battered wings had already fallen apart, and the camel leather covering it had long been blown away by the wind. It really can only fly a little bit. Johnny watched the process of the aircraft taking off and landing, and then turned to look at Lin En, very curious about how he knew so clearly. Steam alone is not enough to sustain flight, and the design of the entire aircraft is not very aerodynamic. It is inevitable that it will fall. Lin En shook his head and replied softly. He naturally saw the problem with this aircraft at a glance. However, this halfling girl named Lydia was able to make this aircraft with such simple materials and make it run. She is definitely an engineering genius. It is also a good idea to imitate the flapping of birds' wings to provide lift, but it is too taken for granted. It only stays at the most basic form, learning, knowing the result but not the reason. In general, history has proved that there is no future in making steam airplanes. This thing is not powerful enough, and it can't fly high or far. You mean, if you change the power and redesign the structure, this aircraft can fly freely in the sky without relying on magic power? The two were chatting when a gentle voice sounded behind them. Lin En turned his head and saw that the person who was speaking was an old man wearing a black robe and a round hat. He looked about 60 or 70 years old. His beard was trimmed very neatly, and there was an inexplicable glimmer between his eyes. Theodore hurriedly bowed and saluted when he saw the man. Master Helram. The man who came was the controller of Yayata Harbor, Helram. As an extremely distinguished great wizard, the other party's clothes were so simple that the residents of the harbor town around him could not recognize him at the first time. It is a great honor to meet you, Mr. Helram. Lin En bowed his head and saluted, expressing respect for the great wizard according to the local customs. Then he did not directly answer the other party's question, but turned to ask back. Alchemical ships that also use steam as power can sail on the sea without relying on magic. Why can't they fly? Helram raised his eyebrows and found this question very interesting. Theodore on the side couldn't wait to speak. Who told you that those alchemical ships have nothing to do with magic? It seems that you must not have learned alchemy very well. As he spoke, Theodore introduced 2 ways to operate the alchemical ship to Lin En. A bumpkin from outside. Either a formal wizard is responsible for controlling the alchemical machine, or magic stones are used as energy to activate the corresponding alchemical array. In other words, is magic power used to make steam? Lin En was ashamed. He really didn't expect that those alchemical ships were not coal-fired. Is this the legendary magic power that consumes 1 wizard for every 100 kilometers? Helram looked at Lin En in surprise. More than 20 years ago, when the steam engine was first manufactured, it did not consume any magic power. Later, using magic stones as energy was just more convenient. In fact, the steam engine installed by Lydia on the aircraft did not use any magic, but there were few new generation wizards in the Yayata Harbor who were willing to specialize in the basic principles of these alchemical formulas. Master Helram. As they were chatting, Lydia had already escaped from the deformed cabin with the help of a group of halflings. The sleeve of her robe was torn, but the girl didn't care. She hurried to Helram and asked expectantly, "Did I succeed? I really flew just now. You should have seen it, right? This can't be considered a success. It can only be said to be." Helram paused and jokingly repeated Lin's words. "It flew a little bit." Lydia's little face immediately collapsed, like a defeated ostrich, and then hurriedly said that she had made great progress this time. As long as she modified it a little bit, this thing would definitely be able to fly successfully. Helram listened to Lydia's story and complaints patiently, and then turned to look at Lin and others. "It seems that you have something to discuss with me. How about this, Theodore? You take a few guests to the academy first. I will be there in a while." Theodore nodded. This was indeed not the place to talk, but before he turned around and left, Prim's voice rang again. "Also, Theodore, if you have any dissatisfaction with me, you can tell me in person." Obviously, Prim not only heard Lin En's evaluation of the aircraft, but also heard the other party's complaints. "No, Master, what I mean is that Lydia is doing a flight experiment in the square, which is too dangerous. If there is any accident, it is not only easy to hurt the townspeople, but also—" And Theodore's expression suddenly paused, and he hurriedly explained, but Prim waved his hand and interrupted him. "Okay, I understand what you mean. Next time I will set up a magic barrier." "Your consideration is not entirely unreasonable." As the aircraft fell to the ground, the farce in the square ended. The townspeople, who satisfied their desire for novelty, gradually dispersed in a burst of noise and gossip. Theodore was quite depressed and took a few people to the Yayata Magic Academy not far away. It was a huge building complex standing in the center of the city, with towering spires, thick black walls, and the most conspicuous landmark building that can be seen at a glance even outside the harbor, the Screaming Tower. Is it so difficult to become a wizard apprentice in Yayata Harbor? Stepping into the gate of the academy, Lin En thought about the flight experiment he had just seen and couldn't help asking. He had heard before that it seemed that the girl named Lydia had to complete this experiment to obtain the qualification to join the Magic Academy, which was a bit too difficult. Wouldn't it be so troublesome for everyone to enroll? "No, that's just a test for Lydia alone," Theodore explained. "In fact, Master Helram has good intentions. These halflings don't have any magical talent. Letting her enter the academy is a complete waste of time." If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelist. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We are waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 55. My name is Lin En, and I am a scholar. Theodore seemed to have an extraordinary desire to perform. Seeing that Lin En and others were interested, he complained a little. In recent years, Lydia has been a well-known figure in the entire Yaita harbor. This halfling kid is very keen on studying some strange things. For example, last year, she imitated the propeller on the alchemical ship and made a gadget called a fan. It can be driven by the alchemical steam device to bring a cool breeze, which is still very useful in the hot summer. But who would put such a large and expensive alchemical machine at home just to blow a gust of wind? For wizards, it is much more convenient to cast a wind control magic. Of course, it is not impossible to rely on manual labor, so some townspeople who pursue novelty are willing to buy these gadgets, which is also the source of funds for Lydia to make aircraft. With Lydia's talent, she can get good treatment as an assistant in any alchemy workshop, but she just wants to become a wizard, which is completely asking for trouble. Theodore shook his head. Even he had to admit that this little halfling girl did have a lot of wonderful ideas, but no halfling in the wizard land had ever successfully become a wizard. Listening to Theodore's story, Lin En vaguely understood why the technology tree in the wizard land was so messy, because magic was too convenient, and many things were not impossible to make, but wizards simply couldn't use them. Several people walked into the front hall of the academy, and halfway through, apprentices in simple clothes kept bowing to Theodore. These apprentices were of different ages. The youngest looked only 11 or 12 years old, and the oldest was no more than 30 years old. Or in other words, if they were over this age and had not become a formal wizard, they would be judged as having no talent and expelled from the academy. This is it. Please wait for a moment. I will go and inform the other instructors of the academy. Theodore arranged several people in a large lounge, asked his apprentice assistant to serve tea, and then walked out quickly. Lin En sat down in a seat at the back. There were several magic books scattered on the mahogany table in front of him. They should be those that a wizard did not have time to take away after reading them. In addition, there was a page that was thrown aside casually. Lin En curiously turned over the folded page, and then found that it was actually a newspaper called Magic Weekly. I didn't expect that the wizarding land even had this thing. The content on the front is some interesting things that happened in the wizarding land, and the back is about the latest theories of magic, and the author's signature is also marked below. Are the magical reactions of electricity and magnetism consistent? 24 Basic Elements Experiments Cause Force, the power that holds up the world. The relationship between the movement of objects and gravity. Lin En flipped through the Magic Weekly for a few times and soon immersed himself in it. This unique perspective of analyzing the world with magic made him feel very novel. Johnny, who was sitting next to him, was very nervous, not as casual as Lin En. Not long after, the door was pushed open again, and Helram, who had met before, walked in with several tutors from the academy. After sitting down in the main seat, Helram did not say anything polite, but looked at Lord and asked directly, I heard from Theodore that you have something very important to report to me in person. Did something happen in the harbor town? I'm afraid the matter is more serious than you think. The entire harbor town's dock has been destroyed, and even the ship gang has been destroyed. Lord spoke carefully, and before he finished speaking, a hoarse voice rang out. Could it be that the ship gang made some mistakes while transporting the supplies and was caught by the church? The one who spoke was Kevine, the plastic professor of the Aida School of Magic. He looked to be about 40 years old, tall and thin, wearing a gray robe, with a shining badge on his chest, engraved with 3 mysterious stripes, which was the symbol of a 3-ring wizard. Loud hurriedly shook his head. He didn't want to take the blame, so he hurriedly explained. However, from his perspective, the information he knew was very limited. He only knew that the beginning of all the events was that Bishop Inra caught Kalwu, who was trying to abduct the Duke's daughter in Nordland, and then tracked him all the way to the harbor town. I knew that Kalwu would definitely cause trouble. We shouldn't have let him leave the wizard land in the first place. Philip, the professor of elemental science, complained rather dissatisfiedly. Of course, He knew Kelu. Before leaving the land of wizards, Kelu had been a professor of genetics at the Aida School of Magic. He also had good achievements in elements, alchemy, and shaping magic. If he continued to concentrate on studying magic, he would probably step into the realm of a great wizard in the future. However, just a few years ago, this guy didn't know what went wrong. He suddenly abandoned everything and prepared to cross the Sea of Mist and go to the Sekis Empire. This was a completely crazy move. Compared to the land of wizards, where people live comfortably and can study magic freely, the Empire is completely the other extreme. It is said that people there live in stinking rotten wooden houses, accept the ignorant rule of the church, and don't even know what elements are. Philip was about to continue talking, but was stopped by his colleagues. You must know that Kelu's move to the Sekis Empire was approved by Master Helram. As the wizards frequently interrupted him, Loud did not dare to have any opinions. He could only take advantage of the time when no one was talking and tell the whole story at the fastest speed, not daring to hide anything. After hearing that Lin En used an extremely powerful magic to kill an archbishop, destroy 3,000 elite guards in armor, and even razed half of the city to the ground, the professors showed incredible expressions on their faces, and even Helram was a little moved. Theodore even suspected that Loud himself messed up the matter, and then joined forces with the wizard named Lin En to make up a reason to conceal his fault. With all kinds of thoughts, the wizards present looked at the two people who had never spoken. Johnny and the others knew each other. 4 years ago, when Kalwa returned to the wizard land, Johnny followed him, but he had no impression of Lin En and the others. I haven't introduced myself yet. I'm Lin En, a scholar of the Secret Law Society in the Sekis Empire and a good friend of Kalu. Under the attention of everyone, Lin En put down the magic weekly in his hand and spoke freely. This is the identity that he and Johnny had agreed on the ship. Thanks to the book friend Xing Xiaozhen, I am your urging person. For the 1,500 starting coins rewarded, Xinglian Firefly Snow. How many floors should I carry for a bag of rice? Xinla Tenzang. For the 500 starting coins rewarded, you are really lonely. For the 300 starting coins rewarded, and the book friend 201909170714571184, Sunstar Lord 999, I don't read ordinary novels, Little Penguin, 1 Carat Dream, the Royal is a little cute, Red Phosphorus Jade Phoenix, your king of the sale is infinitely rampant. For the 100 starting coins rewarded, then how about the 4 starting coins rewarded, and the leader of the building speculation group rewarded 2 starting coins. Chapter 56. Excuse me, the magic theory in the wizarding land is already outdated. Kelm's friend, a scholar of the Secret Law Society, and a former wizard. These are the 3 identities that Lin En gave himself, which can eliminate most of the troubles that may be encountered. It is not easy to expose these lies. For people in the wizard land, Kelm's experience after going to the Sekis Empire is completely blank. Even if he can use magic to communicate, it is impossible to be comprehensive. It is completely reasonable to say that he has only recently met the other party. Anyway, his mentor has been captured by the Holy See and taken to the Holy City. Calculating the time, he is either being tortured or going through the trial process. It is hard to say how many days he can live. In short, he will definitely not be able to jump out and correct his words. Johnny, the only insider, has been saved twice by himself, and he can be regarded as a life and death friendship. More importantly, they can now be said to be in the same boat. Even if it is to avoid being held accountable, the other party has no choice but to keep silent. As long as he can confirm his identity during this period of time, who will believe the words of a wizard apprentice? Sometimes the truth is not as real as a lie. No one was willing to believe that an apprentice who had only been exposed to magic for half a year could kill an archbishop, destroy half of the harbor town, and possess extremely profound knowledge. After Lin En made a simple introduction, the professors present looked at each other, and Theodore spoke first, questioning. You shouldn't be a great wizard yet, right? In Theodore's impression, the witchcraft that could cause such a large-scale destruction must be at least 5 ring magic, and only a great wizard could defeat an army alone. But Lin En looked too young, probably only about 20 years old. This was obviously unreasonable. You must know that the most talented wizard in the wizard land, August, known as the Magic Star, also became a great wizard at the age of 24. Now he is regarded as the hope of the entire wizard world and the person who is most likely to touch the realm of legendary wizards in the future. He didn't believe that this guy who came out of nowhere could be more talented than the Magic Star. Of course I'm not a great wizard. I was able to destroy the harbor town by taking advantage of it. It was all thanks to the help of Mr. Loud. Lin En's tone was not fluctuating at all, and he explained casually. Taking advantage of it? Theodore was stunned for a moment, and then he remembered that Loud had said that before the conflicts with the church broke out completely, Lin En had ordered him to collect a lot of basic raw materials. Is it the blessing of some powerful alchemy array? The professors of the academy thought hard, but they couldn't think of any powerful alchemy array that would need these basic raw materials. Finally, they all looked at the great wizard Helram. The latter pondered for a while before speaking. I heard that a few years ago, the alchemists in the wizard city discovered a unique alchemy formula. It doesn't even require the use of magic power, as long as the number is large enough. The power that bursts out can be comparable to some high-level magic. Lin En's face showed a little surprise. Did the alchemists in the wizard land actually ignite the gunpowder technology? But it's normal to think about it. Black gunpowder is not a high-end thing. It was discovered in the late 9th century in the previous life. Its power is just average. When he was in the harbor town before, it was mainly because the amount was large enough, and he mixed white phosphorus into it to increase the strength. So it had such a good effect. In fact, if time was not too limited, he would have to give these natives a big job. After Helram testified, Theodore and others couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. It turned out to be some kind of alchemical product. It needed to hire thousands of people and spend several days preparing to exert its power. This thing can only be used as a trap, and it will definitely not be used in battle. Regardless of what these college professors thought, Lin En continued to tell the story. The reason Kelu went to the capital of Nordland was actually to meet with another scholar from the Secret Law Society to prove a very important magic theory. As for the abduction, as for the apprenticeship, it was just a cover. I didn't expect that the Vatican would find out about it. Just before leaving, Kelu begged me to sort out a manuscript of the Secret Law Society. He had anticipated that this meeting would not be so easy. If he couldn't come back this time, he asked me to send these precious manuscripts to the port of Yaita at all costs. At this point, Lin En sighed with regret, looked at the professors around him, and said in a low voice, Kelu told me that the wizard land is too closed, and there are many magic theories that are out of date. This new knowledge may bring changes to the wizard land. Ridiculous. How dare he say that? Kevin stood up immediately after hearing this. His eyes widened, and he almost started to spray. What is the wizard land? This is the birthplace of countless top schools. It is the center of magic development and the temple of wizards. They spent hundreds of years transforming this wild island into a magical paradise. Here, every wizard struggles to pursue the truth, and new elements or magic theories are discovered almost every week. Now the other party dares to say that their magic holy land is outdated and can't keep up with the times. This is simply ridiculous. Kelu must have been away from the wizard land for too long, and he doesn't understand the current magic theory thoroughly enough, Kevin said sarcastically. He felt that Kelu's thoughts must still be stuck in the first time he traveled to the Sekaz Empire, so he was shocked when he saw one or two new theories. Little did they know that over the years, the magic theories developed by those great wizards and legendary wizards are enough to fill a bookshelf. The other professors also accused Kelu of talking nonsense and tarnishing the reputation of the wizard land. Lin En did not explain too much, but took out the research manuscript that he had prepared before and put it on the table. Kevin took a manuscript immediately. He wanted to see what kind of novel theory could make Kelu have such an unrealistic idea. Law of free fall? Kinetic energy formula? Ha! I knew that Kelu must not have read Master Yade's magic book when he was in Yaita College. As early as 200 years ago, he had proposed that the falling speed of an object is proportional to its weight, which is also the basis of the gravity formula. Kevin just turned the first page and saw the title, and he couldn't help shaking his head and sighing. But after taking a closer look at the content, He was frozen in place, because the law of free fall in the manuscript is completely opposite to Master Ye's theory. The other party believes that when two objects of different weights are in free fall, their acceleration is the same and they will fall to the ground at the same time. Absurdity. What a fallacy. Theodore was so angry that he laughed. Could it be that if Mount Kogar and a stone were thrown into the air together, they would fall to the ground at the same time? It's ridiculous. Chapter 57. The water ball in my hand is this continent. Theodore's irritable words attracted everyone's attention at once. Facing everyone's surprised eyes, Theodore didn't say much and directly handed over the so-called research manuscript. Kevin and others took it and read it one by one, with mocking expressions on their faces. When the manuscript was passed to Hiram, the great wizard didn't laugh, because he found that the manuscript mentioned something called air resistance. Lin En just took a sip of tea and didn't rush to explain. Instead, he waited for these college professors to read all his research materials. Although he didn't know much about the level of magic in the wizard land, Kalwa had left him two basic books, Element Analysis and Basic Magic General. These manuscripts he wrote were all extensions of the existing theories in the wizard land, and they were very easy to verify. In just 5 or 6 minutes, the wizards finished reading the manuscript. Since the so-called law of free fall was too unreliable, they only glanced at the rest of the content. Then they were surprised to find that there was an even more outrageous argument in the manuscript. Listen, your name is Lin, right? I don't know what Kelly was thinking when he asked you to give this ridiculous manuscript to the wizard land, but I'm sorry to say that the magic theory of the secret society is full of loopholes. Kevin threw the paper in his hand on the table casually and said speechlessly, "And you actually think that the continent under your feet is a sphere? This is ridiculous. Why can't this world be spherical? No one should have verified it yet." Lin slowly put down the teacup in his hand. Although he couldn't fly into space to confirm this thoroughly due to his ability, the fact that he could stand here could explain a lot of problems. For example, the mass and gravity of the planet under his feet must be very close to that of the Earth, because the gravity he felt was almost the same. The changes of the seasons and the sun and moon can also serve as evidence of the rotation of the planet and the revolution around the star. After leaving the Sea of Fog, the first thing he saw when he looked at the port was the top of the Screaming Tower, and then the tower body. The most important thing is the star map. As long as the star is placed in the center, a perfect galaxy operation map can be constructed. This is the most direct evidence. If it weren't for the star map indicating that there are only 5 planets orbiting this star, Lin En would have begun to doubt whether this is another parallel world's Earth, because it's too similar. Since the Yaita harbor faces the sea, I wonder if you have used telescopic magic or alchemical eyepieces to look at the sea surface on weekdays. If so, I think you should be able to notice that when a sailboat approaches from a distance, you must see the sail first and then the hull. As he spoke, Lin En opened his hands, and under the surge of magic power, a huge and turbid water ball appeared in front of everyone, and then he inserted a feather pen straight into the water. Then the water began to surge, and the feather pen rotated from the bottom to the top. The first thing you see is indeed the tip of the feather at the top. The wizards present immediately understood what Lin En meant. The entire huge water ball is like the continent under their feet, and the feather pen is the ship. If the continent is flat, then they will see the entire hull from far to near. Only when the surface is curved will you see the sail first. It seems to be true. Theodore frowned. Every Sunday, he would go to the port to meet new visitors. Sometimes he needed to use far-sighted magic. It was indeed the same as what Lin En said. Every time, he would see the sails appear on the sea level first. This theory seemed to make some sense, but Theodore always felt that there was something wrong. This does not mean that this continent is a sphere. It may be a semi-arc. This makes sense, doesn't it? Another college professor refuted eagerly. And according to what you said, under the action of gravity, the seawater above should have flowed down long ago. While speaking, the college professor also imitated Lin En and directly made a soil ball to simulate the continent, and then attached a layer of water flow on the surface. Then he released the mage's hand, and the water flow immediately flowed down, separated from the soil ball, and formed a puddle on the table. Look, Just like this. This doesn't work at all, the college professor said complacently, and Theodore and others nodded. If the continent is a semi-arc, won't the water fall down? Lin En asked speechlessly. The professors of the academy were immediately stunned. The farsightedness of the ship on the sea showed that the seawater was most likely attached to the arc-shaped land, so the water would definitely flow down. It was impossible for it to stay in the same place. This was totally contrary to common sense. Before they could think clearly, Lin En continued to speak. Also, how can we determine which side is down? Does that need to be said? Of course, the sky is up and the land is down. This is guided by gravity. Theodore frowned and said, he didn't understand why the other party asked such a stupid question. Really? Then how about this? Lin En raised his eyebrows, removed the water ball, put his hand on the soil ball made by the academy professor, and activated the mage's hand. The originally soft soil ball slowly compressed inward and finally became a solid sphere. If the force given by the mage's hand is regarded as gravity, which side is up and which side is down for the center of the earth ball? Theodore was completely confused. Lin En's metaphor of the earth ball for the continent was very simple and easy to understand, so he naturally understood it very well. However, it was precisely because he could understand it that he could not hide his shock. For the center of the sphere, there is gravity on all four sides, so the front, back, left and right are all up, and the bottom is at the center of the sphere, so the water flow will inevitably adhere to the sphere. The professors present also saw this point and discussed it fiercely. Kevin was completely unwilling to believe in this so-called planetary theory and insisted that the continent was flat. The farsightedness of the sailboat was a coincidence and could not be used as direct evidence. Philip and others held the opposite opinion. They believed that Lin En's words might not be unreasonable. At least this was a theory that could make sense and could be used for reference research to confirm its authenticity. When everyone was arguing with each other, Theodore looked at Lin En and asked again, "You mean there is a force that compresses everything towards the center of this continent? That's why the water can stay on the surface of the continent?" Before Lin En could answer, Hiram, who had been flipping through the manuscript, finally spoke. The truth should be just the opposite. There is some kind of force in the center of the continent that spreads out to the surroundings, forming a gravitational field, dragging everything inward. That's what you want to express, right? Thanks to book friend Fenda for the 5,000 starting coins, Leel's doll for the 1,500 starting coins, book friend 20200302113752551 for the 500 starting coins, book friend 1605310855016662, mime, Fengzi Ocean Middle Daja Hongchen for the 100 starting coins, Ran Luo Hongchen for the 10 starting coins, Kilao Chuanchuan's Hang for the 6 starting coins, and book friend 1304152016599373, online game of Resident Evil for the 2 starting coins. Chapter 58 The truth can withstand any form of test. Yes, that's exactly what I mean, Master Hiram. Lin En nodded, looked around at the people present, and then turned the newspaper in front of him half a circle and pushed it in front of everyone. I don't know if you have read this week's Magic Weekly. The legendary wizard Harif proposed that gravity may exist widely in any object, not just the continent under our feet. Speaking of this, Lin En was also a little emotional. After reading the other party's paper published in Magic Weekly, he was surprised to realize that this was not the initial concept of universal gravitation. I just don't know how far this legendary wizard has studied, whether he has figured out the law of universal gravitation, and whether he knows what the essence of gravity is. In any case, this can prove his theory, because in the description of this paper, gravity is not just a downward pulling force, but it will affect the whole body, and may even affect and distort space. Lord Harif's argument is indeed very brilliant and irrefutable, but using this as a mere argument to completely refute the flat earth theory is still lacking in persuasiveness, Hiram said thoughtfully. In fact, after reading the manuscript, he was more inclined to believe that the flat earth theory was wrong. But Hiram also knew that this was a theory that was enough to shake the entire wizard's understanding of the world. Once it was published in Magic Weekly, It was conceivable how much controversy it would cause, so he had to be cautious. I have seen your star map, and the rotation and revolution theory mentioned above is also very interesting. Let's do this. I will send this theory to several great wizards who have made achievements in gravity research. If I can get their approval, it will not be too late to publish it in Magic Weekly, Halram said solemnly. Of course there is no problem. Truth can withstand any form of test. Lin En nodded. What he wrote in the manuscript was the purest theory. It would be great if it could be confirmed by professionals. Then let's stop talking about the flat earth theory and the planetary theory. Halram skipped this topic, then took out another manuscript and continued. This law of free fall is also very interesting. Can you explain it to me in detail? If I'm not mistaken, it should also be related to gravity. I think it's better to do an experiment directly. Lin En shrugged. Practice is the only criterion for testing the truth. Then according to this law, the falling speed of a feather and this earth ball should be exactly the same. Kevin, who had been listening to the conversation between the two and couldn't find a chance to interrupt, couldn't wait to speak. He admitted that the planetary theory that the secret society came up with was indeed a school of its own, but this so-called law of falling bodies was pure nonsense. Kevin directly activated the mage's hand to lift the solid earth ball on the table, and then used the same method to take the feather pen to a high altitude, and then directly cancelled the spell, and the two at the same height fell together. In just 2 seconds, the earth ball fell heavily to the ground and broke into several pieces, while the feather pen took more than 10 seconds to fall to the ground. Seeing this result, the wizards present looked at Lin En together, with sarcastic or playful expressions on their faces. This is just the influence of air resistance. Why not try to conduct the experiment in a vacuum? Lin En said very calmly. In the past half-month of drifting in the sea of fog, he had already done a simple version of the ball experiment in advance, so he was naturally not worried about the possibility of overturning. Vacuum? A group of college professors pondered this new term, and after Lin En's explanation, they soon understood its meaning. Halram thought about it, asked everyone to step back, and then slowly stretched out his hand and tapped it lightly. Lin En immediately clearly felt that the element in front of him was being stripped away at a very fast speed under some inexplicable force. A moment later, a rectangular vacuum field with a length, width and height of 4 meters and a height of 7 meters appeared in front of everyone. Seeing that Halram created and maintained a large vacuum area so easily, Lin En was also somewhat surprised. Although he had sucked away the oxygen around him in the slums before and tricked the witch hunter, in fact, the air was constantly circulating, and he only created a small temporary low oxygen area. The power of a great wizard is much stronger than that of a former wizard. Lin En tried to test him, but he didn't expect that the other party could do it so easily. Halram took the feather pen and used magic to create a solid iron ball, and placed both in the vacuum area at the same time. 2 objects with 1,000 times the weight difference fell at the same time. At this moment, Theodore and others' expressions gradually changed from casual to horrified. Their eyes widened, and they stared at this scene, because the feather pen and the solid iron ball actually fell at the same speed. Really? This is actually true? Philip muttered in astonishment. This is impossible. Master Halram, did you speed up the falling speed of the feather pen? Kevin stood up suddenly, looked at Halram, and couldn't help asking. This remark was undoubtedly a bit offensive, but Kevin obviously didn't care about that. Halram ignored him and continued to experiment, replacing the iron ball and feathers with other materials, wood, stone, water droplets. The results of the experiment were exactly the same. Seeing this, no matter what mood the professors present were in, they had to admit that the law of free fall in the manuscript was the fact. Is Master Ye's theory completely wrong? The puzzled look on Kevin's face never faded from beginning to end. No, there is nothing wrong with his theory, but it is an interpretation of air resistance. Lin En shook his head and said freely, Ye's theory can prevail and be recognized by most wizards, which must be because this theory explains some natural phenomena. For example, the fluid mechanics knowledge used by his teacher Kelly when improving the ice blade is based on the extension of Ye's theory. When Lin En was reading Magic Weekly, he even found that some wizards integrated air resistance into the influence of gravity, and believed that the reason why air and elements kept moving was because of gravity. This is undoubtedly a very confusing hypothesis. However, Lin En would never laugh at or look down on the other party. There are always countless fallacies in the process of exploring the truth of the world, whether in history or modern times. For the same physical phenomenon, scholars from all walks of life can often put forward many different hypotheses, each of which sounds very reasonable and can explain part of the phenomenon. It's just that with the precipitation of time and continuous verification, truth finally defeated fallacy. The reason why he can sit here and talk freely is not because he is smarter than everyone present, but simply because he stands on the shoulders of giants. Chapter 59, Forbidden Psychic Magic. The free fall experiment was over soon. When Helram removed the vacuum field, the professors were unable to recover from the shock. It seems that what Kalu said is right. Some theories in the wizard land are indeed outdated compared to the outside world, Helram said with emotion. In addition to the planetary theory and kinetic energy formula, there are several unverified theories in Lin's research manuscripts, which are proved by many symbols that he can't understand at all. It is definitely different from the existing calculation methods in the wizard land. Theodore, Kevin and others all looked awkward when they heard this, but they didn't refute it. The population of the wizard land is still too small. Philip on the side couldn't help sighing. Although after hundreds of years of development, the shelter of a small group of fleeing wizards has developed into the current magic Holy Land. But even so, the wizard land has only 600,000 people, only about 7,000 formal wizards, even fewer great wizards, and only 7 legendary wizards. Outside the land of wizards, the Sekis Empire alone has a population of 20 million. Even with the Church's pursuit and interception, the number of official wizards must be several times that of here. It is not impossible for them to research some theories before them. Mr. Lin, thank you for taking the risk to bring this precious research manuscript to the land of wizards. At this point, Helram paused, and then spoke again. I have an unwelcome request. I want to hire you as a professor at Yaita College to open a separate subject and teach some new knowledge about the Secret Law Society. From the operation symbols in the manuscript that he couldn't understand, it can be seen that the knowledge of the Secret Law Society is absolutely systematic, and it takes special study to know the meaning of these symbols. If Lin agrees, then when these theories are published in the future, Yaita College will naturally become famous. Facing the olive branch thrown by Helram, Lin's mind turned around, thinking about the pros and cons. There are many benefits to joining Yaita College. First of all his identity problems can be solved, and he also has a backer. Secondly, he can use the title of professor to check the magic books in the college and make up for his lack of magic knowledge. The disadvantage is that Yaita College is not a top institution with legendary wizards, and it is hard to say how much pressure resistance it has. If he proposes a more subversive theory next time, Helram may not be able to hold it. After thinking for a long time, Lin En nodded and agreed. From the contact with the great wizard after entering the port, Helram is not an arrogant and stubborn person. He can tolerate a group of halflings doing flight experiments in the square, and he is not eager to question the various theories he proposed. He should be a very suitable partner. Reliability is always the first priority. If you meet a guy like a famous inventor who likes to take other people's research results as his own, then it's really over. After Lin En agreed to take the professorship, the atmosphere on the field immediately eased. Even Kevin, who was the most opposed before, was no longer as tit for tat as before. After all, if this knowledge can be verified, the entire Yaita College can benefit from it. As for the explosion in the harbor town and the destruction of important transportation routes, no one mentioned it anymore. After all, even if they wanted to hold someone responsible, they didn't know who to hold responsible. Blame Lin En? Are you kidding? As a good friend of Kalu, the other party risked being arrested by the Holy See and took the trouble to send back the novel knowledge of the Secret Law Society and Kalu's apprentices. Is it appropriate to blame the other party for this? This is not appropriate. On the contrary, the entire Yaita College owed the other party a favor. As for Johnny and Loud, one was a wizard apprentice who was brought back without knowing anything, and the other worked for the wizard land in Nordland for decades. He had no merits but hard work, so it was not easy to hold him responsible. In view of these points, they could only helplessly accept the result that the wizard land lost an important transportation route. By the way, Master Helram, when we were fighting Bishop Enruk in the harbor town, one of Kalu's apprentices was attacked by magic. I wonder if there is any possibility of treatment. Lin En suddenly thought of this and said, "Then let's go and take a look." Helram stood up and walked out of the reception room with several professors who were also interested. 10 minutes later, Lin En and others returned to the dock. The sailors of the ship gang were still detained here. After Loud calmed the emotions of these people, he entered the bottom of the cabin of the sailing warship with everyone. A huge ice coffin appeared in front of everyone. A 13 or 14-year-old girl lay quietly in it, her face as pale as paper, her eyes closed, making it difficult to determine whether she was unconscious or dead. Use freezing to maintain the lowest body function? Kevin, a professor of plastic surgery, nodded. In this way, there might be a possibility of treatment. However, after melting the ice and carefully examining it, Kevin became a little suspicious again. She's not seriously injured physically, but she must have been severely traumatized mentally. Can you tell me what magic she released that backfired? It was Soul Scream. Lin En explained. She's a psychic? Philip's brows immediately frowned, and he asked out of the blue, "Is there anything wrong with that?" Lin En asked in confusion. "That's not wrong. But there are no psychic wizards working in the Ida harbor now." Philip sighed, and then explained to Lin En, 3 years ago, a tragic event happened in the wizard land. The psychic school founded by the great wizard Mok caused thousands of people in the entire village to die in a special psychic experiment. This incident angered the entire wizard council. After sending 3 great wizards to destroy the school directly, they suddenly banned all schools from studying psychic magic in private, and those psychic wizards who were recorded in the plan, if they want to continue to study witchcraft, they must join the newly established Psychic Academy in the Wizard City and accept corresponding discipline. It is rumored that those evil wizards have developed a forbidden psychic magic, but the specific reason is probably only known by those legendary wizards. Philip said helplessly, "It is also because of this that after Kelu left, Yaita College did not recruit another professor of psychic magic, because there was no need for it." Hearing this, Lin En was also a little surprised. What kind of forbidden magic could make the Wizard Council impose such strict restrictions on an entire school? Chapter 63 Elements of Becoming an Official Wizard. I'm afraid that only by going to the Wizard City and looking for those wizards who are proficient in psychic energy can there be some possibility of treatment. Philip shook his head and sighed, and told Lin En not to hold too much hope. Although the girl's body was frozen, it seemed that there was no change. Now more than half a month has passed, and the soul is probably long gone. Hearing Philip say this, Lin En was somewhat disappointed. He and Beige didn't have much friendship, but the other party used the soul scream to help him defeat Enruk, so he always tried his best to treat Beige. Freeze it first. I happen to know a master of psychic energy, who may be able to help, if he is free, Helram suddenly said. Kevin, Philip and others looked at Helram in surprise. In order to treat a wizard apprentice who might have died, they asked a master of psychic energy. This was a bit of an exaggeration. Only Orlando showed a helpless look on his face. He knew it would be like this. Thank you very much, Master Helram. Johnny was very moved and bowed. Lin En also expressed his gratitude to the great wizard with a little surprise. At Helram's suggestion, the refrozen white dove was transferred to the medical room of Ida College, while Lin En and Johnny were taken to the professors' and students' residences respectively. Professor Lin En, this will be your residence from now on. Theodore led Lin En into a room. After Lin En entered the door, he kept looking at the surrounding environment. The whole room looked very spacious. It was not just a bedroom for rest. It was also equipped with a small alchemy table and experimental utensils for grinding herbs. Bookcases, beds, tables and chairs were also very complete, which was luxurious in this era. This is the life that people should live. Lin En secretly sighed in his heart. In comparison, when he was hiding from the pursuit of the Holy See in the territory of the Secus Empire, He slept on a thatched wooden bed and ate hard-to-swallow black bread. He lived like a refugee. Sure enough, it was an extremely correct decision to take the risk to go to the land of wizards. If there is anything missing, you can apply to Master Helrim again, Theodore added. But it's better to be something related to teaching. Okay, I'll remember it if I need it. Lin En nodded. He would not let go of the opportunity to get something for free. By the way, Mr. Theodore, can the coins of the Sekha's empire still be used here? Lin En continued to ask. Theodore shook his head. Of course not, but you can go to the gold exchange office at the port and exchange these gold coins for the currency here. The ratio is about 2 Sekha's gold coins for 1 magic gold coin. In addition, as a professor of the academy, you can receive 3 magic gold coins as a basic salary at the beginning of each month, as well as an indefinite amount of research funds. The amount of funds depends on the number of students who choose the new course. Theodore roughly explained the professor's salary, the process of currency exchange, and the currency system of the wizarding land. Seeing that Lin En had no other questions, he said goodbye and left. The moment the door was completely closed, the calm expression on Lin En's face suddenly stopped, and he turned to sit on the chair next to him, with a faint expression of fear on his face. It was impossible to say that he was not worried at all when lying in front of a great wizard whose strength far exceeded his own. Any lie has the possibility of being exposed. If the incident in the harbor town had not been too big before, Lin En would never have come up with this idea. Fortunately, the result was the same as he expected. Now the most difficult stage has finally passed, and the situation is better than he expected. Not only did they not receive any punishment, but on the contrary, they received a certain degree of preferential treatment. Then the most important thing next is naturally to make up for the last flaw and become a formal wizard. Lin En's index finger tapped on the armrest of the chair, thinking constantly in his mind. Just now, when Theodore told him about the duties of a professor, he also mentioned in detail the methods of admission and subsequent promotion of residents of this harbor city. Generally speaking, at the beginning of each year, children over the age of 12 in the harbor city will have a chance to test their magic talent. If they can pass the test successfully, they will be accepted by the Yaito Academy after paying a tuition fee and become a glorious wizard apprentice. After several years of further study, when the growth of magic power stagnates, they can break the final bottleneck by taking a potion called Source of Magic Power. Of course, this kind of magic potion is not so easy to obtain, and it is directly distributed by the Wizard City. According to the rules of Yaito Academy, apprentices need to complete 1 or 2 subjects and then obtain the approval and recommendation of professors of relevant colleges. Lin En saw at a glance that this was the major colleges and even the Wizard Council wanting to monopolize the right of civilians to be promoted to wizards. Of course, on the surface, the reason given by the Wizard Council was very high-sounding, that is, to prevent some apprentices with bad intentions from obtaining more powerful magic power. He has now obtained the status of a professor at the academy, and in theory he also has the qualifications to apply to the parliament for a promotion potion for an apprentice. However, doing so means that he needs to intercept this bottle of Source of Magic Power in private, which not only requires going through the process, but also risks being reported. The second channel is to bypass the academy and the Wizard Council and obtain the potion through other methods. For example, buy it from the black market. Wherever there is demand, there will be buying and selling. It's just a matter of whether the price is enough. Since Source of Magic Power is a potion, there must be a potion master who knows how to make it. If you can find a way to get the formula of this potion, it is of course the safest to make it yourself. Thinking of this, Lin En gathered his complicated thoughts and began his daily routine meditation. The endless sea of elements appeared in front of him again. In any case, before obtaining the promotion potion, he must make his total amount of magic power and mental power perfect. The original Carl was just an ordinary wizard apprentice, who had only been exposed to magic for about half a year. Fortunately, when he traveled through time, the fusion of their souls made his mental power surge, and the magic power that his body could accommodate also increased. According to the marginal theory of magic power growth and basic magic universal, he would be able to reach that bottleneck in about 2 to 3 months. The money that might be needed to buy the source of magic power, the information about the potion, and the time required to increase magic power. These are the three factors that prevent him from becoming a formal wizard. Chapter 61, Mathematics. The next morning, after meditating all night, Lin En simply washed up and walked out of the door. He happened to meet elementalist Professor Philip, who was going out. "Professor Lin En, did you have a good rest last night?" Philip greeted with a smile. "Very good. The conditions here are much more comfortable than those in the Sekas Empire." Lin En's face also had a smile. From today on, he didn't have to worry about the threat of the church all day. "Of course, I heard that the poor there live in houses made of thatch and stone bricks. Is that right?" Philip asked curiously. For Philip, who was born in the land of wizards, the little knowledge he had about the Sekas Empire came from rumors. Every Sunday, he liked to go to the tavern at the dock and listen to the sailors talk about interesting stories outside. As far as the poor are concerned, this is indeed true, but those nobles and priests also live a very luxurious life. Seeing that Philip was interested, Lin En gave him a general account of the empire and the church based on the memory of his original bodyguard. "Since you have fought with the archbishop, do you know how these people use divine arts? Do they also need to learn about elements, shaping or alchemy?" Philip asked again. "I don't think so." Lin En shook his head. "Judging from the selection process of priests in Nordland, clergy only need to be able to fight and have a firm belief in God. This is also a problem he has never understood. Is there any other way to gain power besides exploring the truth?" Philip did not delve too deeply into this. After satisfying some curiosity, he took the initiative to introduce every area of Yaita College to Lin En. Yaita College covers an area of more than 20,000 square meters. The iconic building, the Screaming Tower, is located in the center of the college. Behind it are the residences of students and professors. The magic library and combat training ground are set up on the right side of the college. The rest of the place is the teaching area of each subject: elements, shaping, alchemy, potions. These are the four major subjects of Yaita College now. In addition, in the City of Wizards, some top colleges also offer special courses such as prophecy and force field. Originally there was a Genic school, but it's now abandoned. That will be where you will teach in the future. Philip pointed to the independent building next to the Screaming Tower and said. The entire Genic school looked a little gloomy, covered with thick gray walls, probably because no one had visited for too long. The walls were covered with moss and looked a little dilapidated. "I'll find a few goblins to clean it up later. It should be ready for use in the afternoon." Those Genic wizards are always talking nonsense. "I think it's a good thing that the parliament banned them," Philip said with some gloating, and then told Lin En about the course arrangement. "As a professor, you can arrange the class time freely, but it's best to fix it and try not to conflict with other professors' teaching time. Otherwise the apprentices can only choose between two courses." However, after Philip finished talking about the time arrangement of the four existing courses, Lin En immediately realized that what he said before was nonsense, because almost every day was filled with various courses, and the new course he opened would definitely compete with other subjects for time. Elementology is the subject with the most students in Yaita College. Classes usually start from 10 to 12 in the morning and from 7 to 9 in the evening. Philip kindly reminded him. The meaning was obvious. Lin En should not think about these two time periods. There will definitely not be many people who will come to listen to his new class. Lin En nodded without comment. Philip asked again, "Have you thought of the name of the new subject? Why not call it Mathematical Olympiad?" Lin En said thoughtfully. After accepting the position of professor, Lin En has been thinking about what he should teach. Magic is definitely not an option. So far, the magic he has mastered is less than 10 in total, and maybe even less than some students. Teaching it will only make people laugh, unless he is willing to teach the method of making white phosphorus. However, this thing is one of his few trump cards. Lin En is not going to spread it, so he can only choose the subjects of his previous life. Chinese, geography, and biology are affected by the world and are not suitable as teaching content. Chemistry is quite good, but it conflicts with the subject of elements. It's not good for him to compete with Philip right after he arrives, right? This is a bit unkind, and maybe there are some new elements in this other world that he doesn't know about. so it's better not to teach randomly. As for physics, he just wrote the formula and the other party had to understand the operation symbols. The only choice is mathematics. The circle in this world is still a circle, and the square is still a square. The basic operation rules must be universal, and mathematics is the foundation of all science and technology. It is the most important tool for humans to understand and transform the world. It can be said that most scientific theories can be expressed in the form of mathematical formulas. This subject is always at the forefront of the times. Many cutting-edge scientific research results are completely derived from mathematics. Those magic theories should be no exception. For example, the Hellrim formula he used when studying magic missile, and Kalu's research on fluid mechanics involve a lot of knowledge of mathematical operations. It can be seen that wizards started studying mathematics early, but it has not yet formed a special subject. The reason is very simple. Wizards cannot gain power directly from mathematics. They can only benefit indirectly and use it in some kind of magic. This also leads to all mathematical formulas being attached to various subjects for description. Sometimes even the calculation methods and symbols cannot be unified. After Lin En briefly described the meaning of mathematical Olympiad, Philip's expression became a little strange. He thought that Lin En would specifically talk about those novel theories from the secret society in the new course, but he didn't expect that it would be some simple calculation methods. Will there really be students who specifically learn this kind of thing? Philip opened his mouth, wanting to say something but stopped. He felt that if Lin En only taught these things, he might not be able to recruit even one apprentice. However, it is the freedom of each professor to choose what to teach. Philip couldn't make any suggestions. He secretly thought that he should mention this new course to the students during the class later, so as to avoid the embarrassment of no one when Lin En opened the course. Thanks to Masked for the reward of 2,000 Kidian coins. Book friend 2020302113752551 for the reward of 1,500 Kidian coins. DSF 23DD for the reward of 800 Kidian coins. Young Eagle takes off 12,345,678 for the reward of 500 Kidian coins. Book friends 201711142037046667. Admiral, Angry Little Milk Dog, 416 My Girlfriend for the reward of 100 Kidian coins, and Eternal Only Death for the reward of 32 Kidian coins. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelist. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We are waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 62 Currency Exchange and First Lesson, 2-in-1. This is the money exchange. On the west side of the Iata harbor, Philip led Lin En into a shiny, luxuriously decorated shop. The floor was paved with pure white marble, as smooth as a mirror. Two majestic griffin heads were hung on the walls, and the sharp eagle eyes stared at every guest who came in and out. In the center of the hall was a large incandescent mushroom lamp. This strange self-luminous magical plant usually only exists in the darkest caves, mixed with rats, ghouls and other dirty and dangerous creatures. The price usually ranges from 12 to 30 magic gold coins. In addition to exchanging currency, you can also deposit extra coins here. As long as you show the certificate, you can exchange it for the corresponding magic gold coins in any city in the wizard's land, but you have to pay a certain amount of extra custody fees. Philip continued. Isn't this the prototype of a bank? It already has the storage function of a bank, but depositing money here not only does not have interest, but also requires additional fees. In this regard alone, it is more similar to a bank. As Lin En thought about this, he soon discovered that the gold exchange was particularly lively today. Hundreds of people were sparsely crowded in the hall, seemingly arguing about something. And he actually knew these people. They were Loud and his sailors. Take all your garbage away. We don't accept black ore or copper coins here. A middle-aged man in a gray robe with a copper badge on his chest shouted impatiently at Loud and others. When he saw Philip coming in, his face immediately changed his expression, put on a smile that made people feel like spring breeze, pushed away several sailors who were blocking the way, and greeted them happily. "Ah, it's Professor Philip. It's rare. How come you have time to come here today? It's been a while since I last saw you, Albert. It seems that you found a very good job after graduation." Philip smiled and introduced the two. "Albert, the 9th batch of graduates from Ida Harbor, is a former wizard specializing in elements and plasticity. As for this one, he is the new professor of arcane mathematics at Yaita College, Mr. Lin En." Philip pointed at Lin En and said, "Good morning, Professor Lin En. I heard from the sailors in the tavern last night that you led them to defeat the whirlpool called Eye of Death in the foggy sea. That must be a very advanced magic," Albert boasted, and did not despise Lin En just because he looked young. The professors of Yaita College are usually three-ring wizards with profound attainments in a certain field. The younger they are, the higher their magic talent is, and the more likely they are to become a noble wizard in the future. "Good morning, Mr. Albert. I came here to exchange some coins," Lin En said politely, and then took out 12 Sekis gold coins, 27 silver coins, and 11 copper coins. These were all his property, which were looted from the 2 bishops who were killed in the harbor town. "Copper coins cannot be exchanged, right?" Lin En thought about what the other party had said before, and wanted to take away the dozen copper coins. "Well, of course there is no such situation. It's just that the value of the copper coins is more troublesome to convert." Albert shook his head awkwardly, and before Lin En could make a move, he used the mage's hand to take away the coins, and handed them to the assistant beside him, asking him to take the corresponding magic gold coins. Then Albert complained and explained a few more words. Many of these copper coins from the Sekis Empire were of different sizes, and even the copper content was inconsistent. It was obviously some imperial nobles who secretly minted them. It was too troublesome to convert them. More than 10 seconds later, the apprentice assistant came back with an exquisite purse in his hand. "Please keep it, Professor Lin En." Albert smiled and put the purse in Lin En's hand. Lin En opened it and took a look. His expression became a little surprised, because the amount inside was exactly 12 gold, 27 silver, and 11 copper. "Didn't you say that the currency exchange rate is 2 to 1? Lin En held the purse in his hand and asked puzzledly. "That's just the labor cost of recasting. Since you're a professor at the academy, it would be inappropriate to charge this fee," Albert said with a bit of flattery. Lin En did not reply but picked up a magic gold coin and looked at it. Compared with the currency of the Sekis Empire, the workmanship was much more exquisite. There was a gold symbol engraved on the front and the unique mark of the Wizard Council on the back. Not only that, he also vaguely felt a slight fluctuation of magic power. "This is not just as simple as recasting." Lin En looked at Albert. If there is no suitable reason, he is not prepared to accept such kindness for nothing. "My son Alok is currently studying magic at Yaita College. If possible, please take care of him," Albert said embarrassedly. "So that's the case." Lin En nodded and took the purse. "Since the other party works at the gold exchange, there may be opportunities to deal with each other again in the future. Sometimes accepting kindness is also a way to get closer. If Alok chooses this course, I will pay attention to it. But first of all, my Olympiad math class is very difficult," Lin En kindly reminded. "It's okay. My son is never afraid of doing difficult things." Albert didn't care about Lin En's warning at all, and said confidently, "That's good." Lin En nodded with relief, seeing that the few people seemed to be very happy to talk. Loud on the side couldn't help it at this time, and took the opportunity to ask, "Sir Albert, do you think these copper coins in our hands are, then exchange them all?" Albert waved his hands helplessly. He naturally knew that Loud and Lin En came across the sea together. Now that Lin En is standing here, he still has to give this face, but the relevant handling fees cannot be reduced by a penny. Under the effect of magic, more than 5,000 copper coins were quickly counted. As for the copper content, only a few can be randomly selected for testing, and the lowest one is calculated. About 2 or 3 minutes later, Loud got 2,000 magic copper coins after exchange, and immediately distributed them. The expressions of the sailors and boatmen were about to cry, just like the migrant workers who worked hard for a whole year and only got a reduced salary. They looked pitiful no matter how they looked at them. "Thank you, Mr. Lin En. If we hadn't met here, many brothers in the ship gang would have been starving and freezing," Loud said with emotion. When he was in the harbor town, he was a well-known figure in the area, but when he came to the wizard's land, his identity and status plummeted, especially because most of the wealth he had accumulated over the years was thrown into the whirlpool. Although he didn't become a pauper, it also cut off the possibility of his comfortable life. The sailors of the ship gang were even worse. Some of them only had dozens of copper coins left, and the gold exchange would not exchange them. This was the reason why he insisted on blocking here and wanted Albert to make some concessions. "You don't have to thank me. Mr. Albert is just doing things according to the rules." Lin En shook his head, paused, and then asked, "Have you thought about what you are going to do in the future? There are only a few Sundays every year. It is impossible for Lord and others to go back in a short time. Helram will not let these people who know the wizard land leave easily. It is very likely that they will have to stay here for the rest of their lives. Next, I will probably find some transportation or something like that," Lord said hesitantly, and then looked at Lin En and asked again tentatively, "Sir Lin En, if there is anything that can be used by us, please let me know, if there is a chance." Lin En did not agree or refuse. After a simple reply, he walked out of the gold exchange with Philip. Lord looked down at the flame-shaped mark engraved on the back of his right hand, and his mind was full of thoughts. Before, on the Sea of Mist, he wanted to remind Lin En indirectly to eliminate this magic mark that might endanger his life, but after experiencing the Great Whirlpool incident, Lord's thoughts changed 180 degrees. Without the route from the harbor town to the land of wizards, the entire ship gang has no value to the great wizard Helram. After losing a lot of treasures, Loud knew that they urgently needed to find a new backer, otherwise the 300 people in the ship gang might not all starve to death. And Lin En is undoubtedly the best choice. Although they have only been in contact for half a month, the ability, talent and means shown by the other party are enough to make Loud feel frightened. Not only did he easily pull himself out of the dark, but he also destroyed half of the harbor town with his own strength. Loud has no doubt that the other party may become a great wizard or even a legendary wizard. Now is the time to make the biggest profit. It is with this idea that Loud has kept the flame mark on his right hand. Past experience tells him that sometimes life in the hands of others can gain more benefits, and the other party will use it more confidently. However, what he didn't expect was that after arriving at the wizard land, Lin En actually joined the Yaito Academy directly and became an on-the-job professor. He had all the reputation, status, and money, but it seemed that there was no place for their ship gang. Loud was very helpless. It seemed that there was no point for more than 300 people to force their way in. Obviously, they still lacked a more suitable opportunity to contact Mr. Lin En. On the other side, Lin En, who had just parted with Philip and returned to the room, was thinking about how to earn more magic coins. As a professor at the academy, the salary of 3 gold coins per month seemed a lot. It was enough for a family of civilians in the Sekis Empire to use for 1 or 2 years, but it was not enough to spend on learning magic, especially the 2 subjects of alchemy and potions, which could only be described as spending money like water. Not to mention that he was also considering buying the source of magic power on the black market, which would cost at least hundreds of magic coins, and this salary was too little in comparison. Recruiting more apprentices is a way out. The more students in the subject of mathematics, the more reasons he has to apply for various funds from Helram, then secretly embezzle. It should be said that it is a more reasonable use of the teaching funds. After all, only by improving his ability as a professor can he teach better. In addition, making some novel things for sale is also a good choice, but this requires finding someone to do the work for him. Otherwise it will only delay the time for studying magic. Those halflings may be a good choice. Lin En thought to himself. The flight experiment over the city square yesterday was still fresh in his memory. Using such simple materials, he could make a steam plane. The girl named Delia's talent in engineering was surprisingly high. which met his requirements. It should not be difficult to recruit her as his apprentice and assistant. Although Delia did not have any magical talent, she got Hiram's promise, flying into the sky without magic. What's so difficult about it? As Lin En thought about it, he picked up a feather pen and wrote and drew on the spread papyrus. This was not to study which method to use to fly into the sky, but to prepare for tomorrow's mathematical Olympiad course. This was the basis for maintaining his professor status. If he messed up the first class, it would be difficult to deal with. Things had to be done one by one. At 8 o'clock the next morning, when Lin En, who had changed into a new uniform, came to the Psychic Academy again, the place had been cleaned up and the sign had been changed to the mathematical Olympiad subject. Obviously, Philip had already reported his subject name. A dozen fairies, only 40 centimeters tall, were holding wet cloth strips and buried their heads in the wall, doing the final cleaning. These fairies were not as beautiful as the elves in the fantasy works of the previous life. On the contrary, they looked very ugly, with wings similar to bat wings on their backs. They were a bit similar to little demons. Their IQ was only about the level of 5 or 6 years old, and they could follow some simple commands under the guidance of magic. When Lin En approached, these small fairies hid behind the wall, only sticking out their heads to look at him secretly with their ruby eyes, making a series of humming and groaning sounds. Learning human language was still too difficult for them. However, Lin En did not have time to pay attention to these magical creatures, because as soon as he opened the door, dozens of pairs of eyes looked at him. There were more than 20 wizard apprentices sitting in the spacious classroom. Since this was a new course and there was no grading method, students of all ages were included. Some of them even looked older than him, including Johnny. Although there were not many people in the class, Lin En was very satisfied. He was even prepared for the whole classroom to be empty today. P.S. This time, I combined the 2 chapters into one picture to see if it would look better. I want everything for the new book. Chapter 63 Lin En's Bankruptcy Game, 2-in-1. Happy Mid-Autumn Festival to everyone. Good morning, everyone. I am the new professor of Mathematical Olympiad at Ida School of Magic. You can call me Lin En. Under the surprised or suspicious eyes of the students, Lin En stood on the podium, used his hand as a pen and pure magic as ink to write his name in the void. Then the quiet classroom immediately became noisy. Professor Lin En, I heard that you came from the other side of the Sea of Mist. Can you tell us what it is like outside? Professor Philip said that you think this continent is spherical, so why don't people below fall down? Maybe because Lin En looked too young, about the same age as them. The wizard apprentices were not as restrained as they were when facing other professors, and they chattered and asked all kinds of questions. For example, how did he cross the Sea of Mist and defeat the Great Whirlpool? What kind of magic did he use to destroy half of the port city? And even mentioned his free fall experiment. Obviously, within just a day and a half, his deeds had spread. The wizard apprentices who came to listen to the class were not looking forward to this course, but were simply very curious about this new professor from the Mist Sea. Faced with this series of questions, Lin En didn't know which one to answer first. At this time, Johnny, who was sitting next to him, suddenly asked, Professor Lin En, what is Olympiad mathematics? Lin En breathed a sigh of relief and then explained, good question. Olympiad mathematics is a subject that studies complex concepts such as quantity, structure, change, and space. You can use it to measure the circumference of the planet under your feet, explore the laws of the movement of stars, and analyze cosmic constants. Olympiad mathematics contains almost everything you see. It is the most important tool for understanding the truth in the world. While speaking, Lin En used the principle of sound wave transmission to increase his volume, which made everyone's eardrums buzz and successfully made the originally noisy classroom quiet again. Every apprentice present couldn't help but feel a little fascinated when listening to those extremely high-sounding terms coming out of Lin En's mouth. Many people even realized that they were taking a very special magic course. However, after drawing the pie, Lin En changed the subject and continued to speak. Of course, this advanced knowledge of mathematics is still too far away from you. Now you must start with the simplest addition, subtraction, multiplication and division. Isn't that just counting? The apprentice leaning on the front row couldn't help but interrupt. We have already learned all these in the basic class. The prerequisite for learning magic is to be able to read and understand the most basic principles of calculation, so Yaito Academy usually gives children born in poor families a period of time to cram basic knowledge, teaching them to read, count, and recognize basic magic symbols. After learning multiplication and division, can we master some powerful magic? Another wizard apprentice asked curiously. No. Lin En shook his head, seeing his denial. The expressions on the faces of all the students suddenly became very disappointed. Some even suspected that Lin En had just made such a miraculous statement about Olympiad mathematics just to fool them into taking this course. Then isn't this Olympiad mathematics course the same as the basic course? There's nothing difficult about math. It only took me more than a month to master it all. A freckled teenager who looked about 15 years old raised his head proudly and asked, "Oh, really? Are you sure?" Lin En asked back with a smile, and then clapped his hands, attracting everyone's attention. Although he could release magic barrage to show these people the powerful combination of magic and Olympiad mathematics, Lin En knew that if the Olympiad mathematics course wanted to continue, he had to let these people know that even pure mathematics still had unimaginable power. In that case, let's make a bet. Lin En had a slight smile on his lips, stretched out his hand and snapped his fingers. Under the effect of Mage's hand, the 4 desks in front of him floated up, and then spliced into a larger square table. Then the feather pen placed on the desk was automatically dipped in ink, dividing the large square table into 6 rows and 6 columns. A total of 36 squares. The rules are very simple. Put a copper coin in the first square, 2 in the second square, 4 in the third, 8 in the fourth, and so on. Lin looked around at every apprentice in the classroom and spoke in a very tempting tone. If someone can fill these squares with the corresponding coins, I will immediately write an application to the Wizard Council to explain that he has completed the study of the arcane mathematics with full marks, and give him a bottle of Source of Magic. Professor, is this true? Are you kidding? Another tall and thin apprentice in his 20s, Pierce, stood up suddenly and asked excitedly, "What is Source of Magic?" It is the most important thing for a wizard apprentice to be promoted to a formal wizard. It is worth hundreds, or even hundreds of magic gold coins, and it is not something that can be bought with money. For a poor student like him who has not completed any subject in his 20s, both of Lin's promises are particularly important. Of course, I guarantee it with my personality. Lin nodded and said without hesitation. Hearing Lin's decisive words, Pierce hesitated for a moment. His life experience told him that there was no such a cheap thing in the world. Either the professor in front of him was fooling him, or there was something wrong with it. Pierce roughly calculated in his mind, but soon he couldn't do it anymore. He could only roughly estimate that it would take 63 copper coins to fill the first 6 grids of the first row, which didn't seem to be a lot. Does anyone want to try? There is only one spot, Lin said again temptingly. I'll do it. The freckled boy who interrupted him before stood up impatiently. Pierce looked at Alok standing up and immediately regretted it. He shouldn't have hesitated. He didn't even have the courage to fight. No wonder he couldn't be promoted to a formal wizard. What's your name? Lin asked curiously. I'm Alok, Professor, the wizard said loudly. So your name is Alok? Lin En nodded. Yesterday, he just accepted a favor from the other party's father, asking him to take care of this kid. Isn't this opportunity here, Alok, right? I must remind you first that this bet cannot be abandoned. Since you play it, you must fill the entire square, and the money you put in will be used as research funds for this subject. This is the price you pay in exchange for my promise and the Source of Magic, Lin En kindly reminded. Of course, no problem, Alok said, patting his chest. Although he couldn't calculate how many copper coins it would take to fill these squares, he knew very well the difference in value between a copper coin and a bottle of Source of Magic. This is a difference of millions of times. Millions of copper coins can fill these 36 squares at any rate. No, perhaps only 20,000 or 30,000 copper coins are enough. And Source of Magic is something that can't be bought with money. Then please. Lin En pointed at the square table, with a signature smile on his face. indicating that Alok could start his performance. Alok was not at all nervous, and took out his purse and put the first copper coin on the first square, then 2, 4, 8, 16, 32. When he placed it on the sixth square, the copper coins in his hand had been used up, and the seventh square required 64 copper coins. Alok took a silver coin in his hand, hesitated for a while and did not put it down directly, but turned his head to look at the students who were watching the show, and said very generously, "Can anyone lend me some copper coins? When I fill this square, I will pay you back double tomorrow." Inspired by Alok, the wizard apprentices present generously took out their purses, not worrying that the other party could not pay it back. Pierce, who was still regretting, even took out all his savings, 6 gold coins. Soon the borrowed coins filled the entire table, and only Johnny watched on the side without any intention of taking the money. "Johnny, aren't you going to make some money?" Lin En asked curiously. "Or have you figured out the result?" The silver gray-haired girl rolled her eyes at him, although she couldn't figure out how many copper coins were needed to fill the 36 squares. She knew that there was nothing wrong with Lin En's brain, and he couldn't take out a bottle of source of magic. Alok, who was standing by, seemed full of confidence. With all the apprentices' funds put together, there were already more than 20 gold coins and more than 200 copper and silver coins. No matter what, they could fill all the squares. Thinking of this, Alok grabbed a handful of coins and filled the second row of squares. After spending a total of 40 silver and 95 copper coins, 1/3 of the squares on the square table had been filled. Easy, too easy. Most of the apprentices had begun to regret why they didn't stand up first. Even Johnny, who had great confidence in Lin En, began to waver. Could this square table really be filled? Alok was even more excited, and he piled 40 silver coins and 96 copper coins into the 13th square. However, when he continued to fill in the blanks, he vaguely sensed something wrong, because the last square inches the third row needed to hold 13 gold coins. This is probably seems. Is it a bit too much? Alok's expression became hesitant, and he didn't have enough money to fill in the next square. "You can write the amount directly with a pen, and we'll calculate it together when the time comes," Lin En reminded him indifferently, without any intention of embarrassing him. Alok looked at the half-remaining square, gritted his teeth, took the feather pen beside him, and filled in the blanks line by line. 200. No. 300. As long as the total amount he spent was less than 300 magic gold coins, his father should be able to forgive him. After all, source of magic cannot be bought with money. However, with this idea in mind, Alok only filled in 4 squares and found that his budget had been used up, and he had to pay a lot. Under Lin En's kind gaze, Alok's hands were shaking as he wrote the numbers. The numbers were so huge that he had to use paper and pen to assist in calculations starting from the third line, but Alok would rather not be able to calculate it himself. His heart tightened with every number he wrote down. When he wrote the 5th line, he was about to cry. Alok had already silently calculated the assets of his family in his heart, and then he found something that frightened him. It seemed that their family was bankrupt. No. This was no longer a problem that could be solved by bankruptcy, because to fill the last number of the 5th line, it would take a full 53,687 magic gold coins. Alok's mind was blank, and he fainted. Even if he became a formal wizard in the future, he would not be able to make so much money even if he worked non-stop for hundreds of years. And there was still a whole line on the square table that was not filled. Alok, who suddenly fell to the ground, scared everyone present, including Lin En. He didn't want to scare people to death on his first class. After using his shallow medical knowledge to check, Lin En soon found that the other party was not seriously injured. He immediately made an ice cube and pressed it on the forehead, which soon woke the man up. Alok looked dazed. He seemed to have had a dream just now. He dreamed that he played a game with the professor and then owed a debt that could not be repaid for a lifetime. When he opened his eyes, he found a fact that he didn't want to face. It seemed that this was not a dream, but real. "Since you are awake, fill in the last square according to the agreement." Lin En patted Alok's shoulder and encouraged him. Alok's face was uglier than crying, but he had to sit in his seat. In the end, he could only give up completely and comfort himself in his heart. He couldn't afford 50,000 magic gold coins, so what difference would it make if it increased to 200,000 or 500,000? There is really a difference. Alok's brain collapsed after writing a long string of numbers. After filling in the last square, Alok had to count the units one by one with his fingers. 1, 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, million, 10 million, 100 million. Alok could not bear to count anymore, but Lin En directly revealed the answer. It is 34,359,738,368 copper coins. Hearing this terrifying number, the students present were all dizzy and looked at the square-long table in front of them. It was hard to imagine that 33.3 billion copper coins could be accommodated in this small square. Johnny also showed an incredible expression on her face. Although she could imagine that it would take a lot of copper coins to fill the square, she never expected it to be so terrifying, let alone Alok. I'm afraid that even if the entire Yaita harbor was sold, it would not be enough to raise this amount of money. Just a square game instantly made all the wizard apprentices appreciate the horror of exponential growth. Lin En looked at the students who were silent and still immersed in the huge numbers, and said solemnly, "This is the power of Olympiad mathematics. If someone can transform the power of Olympiad mathematics into magic, it will be powerful enough to destroy this planet and even the entire universe. This is no joke." Theoretically, after a piece of paper is folded in half 103 times, its theoretical thickness exceeds the diameter of the observable universe. Anything that can keep growing exponentially by 2 will soon burst the entire universe. P.S. I wish you all a happy Mid-Autumn Festival. Today, I will release 2 chapters together. I'm happy with the new book. Chapter 64, Basic Principles of Magic and Analysis of Elemental Magic, 2 in 1, Q equals 1, SN equals A1 1 QN. 1Q. Lin En used magic power as ink to write out the formula represented by the square game, and then looked at the apprentices who had not yet recovered from the horror of exponential growth, and said loudly, "Why don't you write down this formula?" Johnny and others hurriedly turned the pages, picked up the quill pen and copied down the formula that they couldn't understand at all. Alok, who was standing there in the daze, was the best example of the consequences of not learning Olympiad mathematics. Professor Lin En. Alok looked at Lin En, trembling and shouting, his eyes filled with tears, almost crying directly. "Alok, I just heard you say that you are good at math." Lin En asked. "I'm not, I don't talk nonsense." Alok hurriedly shook his head and wanted to deny it, but Lin En waved his hand and continued to speak. "Let's put it this way, as long as you can accurately calculate the total value of the copper coins in these 36 squares before class tomorrow, the bet will be settled. Of course, you only have one chance to speak." Lin En glanced at the pile of coins on the table with a little regret, but he didn't mean to accept them. First of all, the other party couldn't possibly take out the money. Secondly, he used a game to make all the apprentices spend their savings, which was a bit too scary. Who would dare to come to his Olympiad class in the future? Alok stared blankly at the floating magic fluorescent lights. He couldn't understand what these operation symbols were. He even began to doubt whether he could count. Pierce, who was envious of Alok before, immediately became gloating. Fortunately, he hesitated for a moment, otherwise he would be the one making a fool of himself. Unexpectedly, Lin En changed his tone, looked at the people present, and continued to speak. "You too, if I remember correctly, when Alok borrowed money from you, he said, if he can fill all the squares, he will pay it back double. Unfortunately, Alok failed to do this, so the promise is invalid. Not only can you not get more gold coins, but the money you deposited before must continue to be with me." Lin En reached out and picked up a few gold, silver and copper coins on the square table, and said playfully. Hearing this, the classroom of the Mathematical Olympiad class suddenly wailed. Pierce and others kicked Alok in anger. This kid actually cheated. Lin En raised his voice a little bit and pointed at the exponential summation formula floating in the air. "There is a simple way to do exponential addition. If I know the last number, I can calculate their sum in 10 seconds. The after-class task I give you is to find the pattern and solve the formula I wrote. When you get the answer, you can take the money back." Lin En looked around at the students who were holding feather pens and working hard, and nodded with satisfaction. Only this kind of personal experience can make people truly feel the charm of Olympiad mathematics. In addition, he is also using this game to find out the mathematical level of these apprentices. Judging from Locke's performance, they have already learned the most basic operation rules. Next time, maybe we can start teaching from a slightly more difficult formula. The 2-hour Olympiad mathematics class ended quickly. Although they did not learn any new magic, all the students were forced to maintain a high enthusiasm under the idea of getting their deposits back, and they even couldn't wait to share what they saw and heard in class with others. In just one day, the name of Professor Lin En's square plate game has spread. In order to let more people understand the charm of exponential growth, Lin En directly moved the square plate to the front of Yaita College, and changed the squares into 7 rows and 7 verticals, a total of 49 squares, and erected a sign on it, rewriting the rules of the bet. If anyone can fill these squares with the corresponding copper coins, he will give away the alchemical formula used to destroy the harbor town. That's right, just start with a copper coin and fill it up according to the rule that the copper coins in the next square are twice the copper coins in the previous square. After filling it up, you can even take the money back, and he won't charge a penny. This time, not only the wizard apprentices, but also several professors in the college were a little tempted. Is there such a good thing? This alchemical formula that requires a lot of preparation to burst out with powerful power, although it looks troublesome, can play a special miraculous effect in some special occasions. You must know that the power of this thing can be comparable to 5-ring or even 6-ring magic. In the evening, while all the students were leaving school or returning to the dormitory, Professor Kevin of Plastics sneaked to the combined square table and studied the rules on the square plate. Does the number on each square have to be doubled than the previous one? Kevin touched his chin and pondered in his heart. Just as he was thinking, a familiar voice came from behind. Don't calculate, it's absolutely impossible to fill these squares. Do you know how much savings I have, Professor Philip? Kevin asked with a little dissatisfaction, and he knew a lot of friends. Anyway, this money is only used to fill the squares. After filling them, you can take it back, or borrow some more. Could it be that these squares are really the same as the rumors, and all the wealth of the entire Yaita harbor cannot be filled in? Kevin sneered at this statement. This rumor is simply too outrageous. Do you know how many copper coins are needed to fill the last square of these 7 rows and 7 columns? Philip said helplessly. It's 281 trillion, 2,801,000 copper coins. That's a lot. Kevin was somewhat surprised, but after a pause, he suddenly realized that the unit Philip mentioned seemed to be 1 trillion. 1 trillion? Wait, are you sure you didn't make a mistake? Kevin was completely confused. It was the first time he heard of the unit of trillion. Of course not. I have verified it myself, Philip said unhappily. He was also a little surprised when he heard those apprentices talk about it before, and then he used a full 9 sheets of manuscript paper to calculate it all, because those numbers were too long. Kevin silently calculated in his mind. Although it was just the simplest multiplication, the amount became larger and larger as he calculated it. It was a bit difficult to maintain mental arithmetic alone. In the end, he could only make a rough estimate. According to the experience of the previous columns of numbers, the amount will increase by about 10 times every 3 to 4 grids. There are a total of 49 grids, which means at least 100 trillion times. Kevin couldn't help but take a breath of cold air. Such an increase is really too terrifying. Let alone the Yaita harbor, even if the entire continent was emptied, it would be impossible to collect so much money. Fortunately, he chose to sneak out and try it when there were not many people around. Otherwise he would have made a fool of himself in front of the students. Kevin was secretly glad in his heart, and then he found that in addition to the rows of squares on the square table in front of him, there were also some strange characters engraved. When Q equals 1, SN equals A1 1QN. 1Q. What are these runes? Some kind of magic symbol? Kevin asked puzzled. This seems to be The summation formula of a geometric series? It should be called this, right? Philip said uncertainly. Professor Lin said that as long as he calculates the last number, he can calculate the total amount of copper coins in these squares within 10 seconds. Can such a large amount of data really be calculated within 10 seconds? Kevin frowned. Master Helram seems to have figured out the meaning of this Olympiad formula. Philip exclaimed, "It's only been an afternoon. You are worthy of being called the Great Wizard. Did the master tell you what these Olympiad symbols mean?" Kevin asked eagerly. After performing exponential calculations, he found that this so-called Olympiad seemed quite interesting. "No." Philip shook his head regretfully. "Master Helram only asked me to come here to add a small reward to this game. Whoever can first figure out the meaning of this formula can get a reward of 20 magic gold coins." As he spoke, Philip took out the gold coins and used magic to fix them on the square table. At this moment, the new professor of the Olympiad class, Lin En, who was the subject of everyone's discussion, was sitting leisurely on the sofa in the room, eating the dinner sent by the goblins while checking the basic principles of magic and analysis of elemental magic borrowed from the college library. Although the professor's life at Ida College is very comfortable and he does not feel the slightest crisis, Lin En will not slack off because of this. Everything in the wizard land was unfamiliar to him. Once he encountered any trouble, the only thing he could rely on was his own strength. In addition, as a professor, he had to make up for some basic magic knowledge. However, these 2 books on magic principles written by legendary wizards made Lin En's head big, because the books were full of a lot of words such as Selu, and Zesi, Kos, etc. that made him completely confused. He could only verify them bit by bit according to the descriptions of these nouns in the books. It took more than 3 hours to analyze, combined with his own understanding of magic after crossing. Lin En barely understood the first half of the book. First of all, his previous guess was not wrong. Wizards do release magic by controlling, influencing, and mimicking elements. However, the ability of formal wizards is very limited. Not all elements can be controlled, and the accuracy is not enough. At least it is impossible to smash molecules or atoms, and can only perform simple permutations and combinations. Hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus. Lin En silently thought about the 4 elements he had controlled, and he couldn't help but have a few guesses in his mind. First, the difficulty of element control may be related to the element period. For example, a formal wizard can only control the short-term elements in the first 3 rows of the periodic table, but cannot control the long-term elements in the 4th to 7th rows. The second is determined by the number of nuclear charges in the element. The third is to divide it by metal and non-metal elements. In this regard, Lin En once did an experiment and tried to cast the zero-ring magic, primary material deconstruction, to disintegrate the steel sword in his hand. The result is obviously that he failed. No matter how hard Lin En tried, the sword remained motionless. This means that with the ability of a wizard apprentice or even a formal wizard, it is impossible to directly affect the metal element. Of course, it is not necessarily the case for great wizards and legendary wizards, because according to the basic principles of magic, primary material deconstruction also has 2 advanced magics. They are the 4-ring magic, advanced material deconstruction, and the 7-ring magic, great disintegration. Coincidentally, the 4th and 7th rings are the dividing lines for being promoted to great wizards and legendary wizards. While thinking, Lin En asked 071 to record these contents in the research file, and then flipped through the second half of Basic Principles of Magic, which described the various magic power more mysteriously. This legendary wizard regarded magic power as the origin of the entire universe, the most basic thing that constitutes all matter, and the real power of creation. Origin? Lin En frowned. According to his observations over the past few days, magic power seems to exist in every corner of this world, but unlike elements, he can only perceive it but cannot really see it, unless he uses magic such as magic missile, to temporarily make magic power materialize. Forget it. This is obviously not something he can study clearly at his current level. Lin En touched his head, which was a little painful from thinking about it, and decided to put this question aside for the time being. and then opened detailed explanation of elemental magic, fireball, corrosion, loud spell, ice touch, secondary, hand of the fire demon, pyroblast, poison field. The entire book analysis of elemental magic records a total of 17 kinds of magic from the first ring to the third ring. Lin En glanced at the so-called second and third ring magic for a few times, and then stopped paying attention to it, and instead focused his attention on the first ring magic. With the help of the power of the intelligent brain, although he can complete the magic mimicry as a wizard apprentice, which is something that only formal wizards can do, it is limited to learning and using first-ring magic. For example, the principle of the third-ring magic poison field is to use magic to transform into some toxic gas, which may be chlorine or fluorine. In short, it is not an element that he can get in a short time. If he can't analyze it, he can't convert it for use. His mental power is far from enough to cover such a large range. In the case of close range, it is better to simply reduce or increase the oxygen content in the air, which can also achieve a similar effect. With his current ability, learning and improving the first-ring magic is the most worry-free. The first-ring magic is also divided into ordinary and superior. The so-called superior magic is actually a simplification of higher-level magic, or an enhancement of low-level magic. For example, his white phosphorus fireball, strictly speaking, belongs to the first-ring superior magic, but because of the toxicity and indestructibility of white phosphorus, its power has reached the level of second-ring magic. Another improved magic, white phosphorus hand of the flame demon, has a destructive power close to that of third-ring magic. However, Lin En is very aware of the limitations of white phosphorus fire. Don't look at him using this thing to kill people in the territory of the Sekka's empire, and even killed in luck, who is comparable to a third-ring wizard. Lin En is very clear in his heart that this thing is okay to bully those uneducated bishops, but once it is used against wizards, its power will be greatly reduced. After all, the two important characteristics of white phosphorus fire can be dealt with by formal wizards. Once the information is leaked, it will not be so easy to achieve good results. Therefore, he must learn more magic to increase his trump cards. P.S. I ask for everything in the new book. 2 chapters will be released today, and you can also discuss whether it is better to have more of this kind of scientific principles, or to keep it as brief as possible. Thanks to bookfriend 20200302113752551 for the reward of 1,500 starting coins. Zizixi Zion That Moment Smile is Like a Flower 2020 for the reward of 500 starting coins, and Mo Yuiyang, 10,000 Years of Tanshan Snow Lotus, and Local Planning Bureau for the reward of 100 starting coins. Chapter 65 Ultra Low Temperature Field. Lin En's eyes swept over the 10 first-ring magics. After hesitating for a long time, he chose Touch of Ice as the object of improvement. The principle of this magic is also very simple, which is to manipulate the elements in the air to cool it down and condense it to interfere with the enemy. The role it plays in battle is very limited. If it weren't for the advanced magic, Ice Field, I'm afraid not many people would be willing to learn it. Lin En certainly had no intention of learning it, but was prepared to transform it according to the principle of this magic, such as changing another element to cast this magic, and the element he chose was nitrogen. This element is called Suru in the wizard's land, and in Kalu's manuscript, it is even classified as a useless element. Considering that nitrogen generally does not react with other substances, it is normal for some wizards to ignore it directly. However, Lin En knew that nitrogen was not as useless as the other party said. It could not only be used to make fertilizers and act as a protective gas, but also synthesize another toxic gas, ammonia, with hydrogen. The most important thing is that the boiling point of nitrogen is -196 C. Such a horrible low temperature is enough to freeze most things in a very short time. Of course, due to the light and frost effect, the human body can withstand high and low temperatures for a short time, but this protection formed by the vapor layer is very weak and will be disintegrated in just 2 seconds. Then the fragile skin will face the extremely piercing ultra-low temperature, the epidermal cells will quickly necrotize and fall off, and then all the fat, muscle, and blood will solidify instantly. The second reason why Lin En chose nitrogen is that the nitrogen content in the atmosphere is extremely high, accounting for about 70% to 80%, which means that he does not need to consume magic power to create this element, and can create a larger range of ultra-low temperature areas. 071. Turn on overload mode. Lin En silently chanted in his heart, and then closed his eyes to sense it. In the vast sea of elements, there was no need to look for active nitrogen elements, because they were everywhere and easy to control. About 4 or 5 seconds later, the temperature around him began to drop rapidly, and the nitrogen that was close to liquefaction appeared in the form of white mist, spreading in all directions. A slight sound rang in the room, but it was the tea on the table that instantly condensed into ice crystals after the white mist drifted over. Not only that, the surrounding tables, sofas and various decorations were covered with a layer of white frost. A gecko lying on the wall foraging stared at the moth in front of it, and was about to pounce, when the white mist spread over, accompanied by a biting chill, and the skin, bones, and blood instantly solidified. The gecko, which was still in the air, used its tail as a support point and was suspended in the air. The same treatment was also given to the moth, which was flapping its wings. Both of them remained in the state of action at the moment and were directly frozen into 2 ice sculptures. "It's so cold." About a minute later, Lin En suddenly opened his eyes and shivered, and then directly used the fireball spell to ignite the fireplace in the room. The system prompt sound in his mind also rang. Energy consumption of 5%, remaining energy of 53.7%. So much consumption? Lin En frowned. Although there was one less step of magic mimicry, the computing power required to control so many elements at the same time was indeed not small. Perhaps reducing the control range, or targeting only one direction like touch of ice, would be a good way. Also, the casting speed just now was too slow. If it were in a battle, the enemy would not give him a minute to cast a spell. It seems that he needs to practice more often. Lin En summarized the advantages and disadvantages of this new magic, looked at the room that looked like an ice crystal world, and couldn't help but pat his forehead. After seeing the gecko stuck to the wall with a stiff body like an ice sculpture, he walked over with some curiosity. Living things frozen by ultra-low temperatures may still have a trace of life after thawing if they are not frozen for a long time. However, before Lin En took 2 steps, the gecko's slender tail broke directly because it could not support the weight of the body. The whole body fell to the ground with a snap and shattered into ice debris. "Well, it's no longer salvable." Lin En shook his head and used a fire to get rid of the debris on the ground. "I shouldn't do experiments here." Lin En looked at the room covered with frost and couldn't help but sigh. It seems that the alchemy workshop must be built as soon as possible. Otherwise he won't even have a secret place to practice magic. If an ignorant apprentice breaks in when casting a spell next time, the consequences will be serious. "Money, money." Lin En muttered a few words with emotion, changed his robe stained with liquid nitrogen, took his professor badge, and went out to find money. In the evening, on the west side of Yaita Harbor, in a remote workshop, halfling Darren was fiddling with the gadget made by Lydia out of boredom. This is a T-shaped flying toy made of hollow wood. As long as you put it in your hand and spin it hard, it can fly directly with the wind. But why can this thing fly, but larger aircraft can't? Just when Darren was puzzled, the wind chime hanging at the door suddenly rang. "Welcome to the halfling workshop." Darren quickly put down the toy in his hand and turned to look at the door. It was Lin En who entered the door. To avoid being too conspicuous, he did not wear the professional robes issued by the Iata Academy, nor did he wear the medals, but Darren quickly recognized that this must be a wizard, because a few days ago in the square, Lin En appeared next to the great wizard Helrim and had a pleasant conversation with him. Realizing that this was a big customer, Darren immediately shuddered, stood up from his chair, rubbed his hands excitedly, and asked respectfully and humbly, "Master Wizard, is there anything you need?" "There are many novel and interesting things in the workshop. You can take a look at this fan. It can rotate by itself without magic. Also, this steamship model, put it in the water, and then pull the rope at the back. It can really move." Chapter 66. Hand-cranked fans, miniature steamships that move, wooden flying wings. and many equally proportioned, very delicate carriage and house models. Lin En even saw the prototype of a water wheel in the center of the workshop. This is a round wooden wheel with a diameter of about 1 meter. Water flows down from the reservoir above the workshop, driving the wheel to rotate continuously. At the same time, it also drives the giant fan in front to rotate slowly, providing a cool breeze for the guests entering the workshop. It's really a waste of talent. Lin En shook his head. This thing can be used to irrigate farmland or even generate electricity, but Lydia only wants to use it for the power of the fan. Darren saw Lin En shaking his head and sighing, and his heart suddenly rose to his throat. Although these gadgets made by Lydia are very interesting, they are definitely not comparable to the alchemical instruments of wizards. Fortunately, Lin En didn't mean to keep it a secret and spoke directly. I'm not here to buy goods this time, but to ask you to make something according to the blueprint. As he spoke, Lin En picked up the model of the steamship and took a look at it. The model was very delicate, almost restored in proportion, down to every detail, from the chimney to the cabin and then to the hull. It was exactly the same as the steamships he had seen at sea, except that there was an extra rope at the back of the cabin, which could drive the propeller below to turn as long as it was pulled. Almost instantly, Lin En guessed its principle, and a smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. He asked again, I heard that Lydia has very skillful hands and can always make items exactly as required. Is that true? Of course, I dare say that no one in this Yaita port has better craftsmanship than Lydia, Darren said very confidently. Even many wizards praised Lydia's gadgets after seeing them, so she got the name of skillful hands. Is she in the workshop now? Lin En put the model aside. I want to see for myself whether she can meet my requirements. No problem. Lydia is busy in the backyard now. I'll take you to find her. Darren quickly jumped off the stool, hung up the sign for rest, and opened the door to the backyard of the workshop. Lin En followed Darren in and saw the large aircraft he had seen before. The halfling Lydia he was looking for was standing under the aircraft at this moment, holding a hammer that was half her body long, and hammering several thick iron nails into the wings of the aircraft. After completing all this, Lydia wiped the sweat from her head, and then pulled the wing hard with her hand. The joints were very strong, but the stability was still a little poor, which was why some parts of the aircraft fell apart directly after landing. The halfling girl didn't notice the two people who came in at all. Her brows were slightly furrowed, and her robe was already covered with dust, but she didn't care at all. Her mind was full of how to improve this aircraft. At this moment, Lin En's voice suddenly rang out. Since the quadrilateral is not stable enough, why not try to add a crossbeam at the diagonal corners to transform it into two triangular structures? Lydia was stunned for a moment, and immediately turned her head, only to find Darren and Lin En standing beside her. Master Wizard? The halfling girl shouted in doubt. She also quickly recognized Lin En, whom she had met briefly in the square before. You can try it first. Lin En pointed to the wings of the aircraft and said with a smile. Lydia was not afraid of the stage. She immediately pulled up her sleeves, grabbed a piece of wood of the right size with both hands, and placed it at the diagonal corners on both sides of the wing. Then she picked up the hammer and nails and kept knocking. What a great strength! Lin En was very surprised to see Lydia, who was only about 1.3 meters tall, easily lift a wooden board that was bigger than her. The rumor that halflings are naturally strong is indeed true. This is not in line with biology at all. Lin En looked at the halfling girl's arms, which could only be considered strong, and couldn't help but complain in his heart. Then he directed the other party to build brackets everywhere on the aircraft to strengthen the overall structure, and removed many unnecessary structures to reduce the weight of the aircraft itself. Darren also hurried forward to help. After a long time of busy work, the entire aircraft was completely renewed. The wide wings on both sides were connected to the fuselage with a triangular structure. Lydia pressed her hands on the wings and shook them hard for a few times, and then knocked them with a hammer, but there was no deformation at all. This is simply great. The joy on Lydia's face was almost overflowing, and then she turned her head to look at Lin En and asked in confusion, but why is this so? She had noticed this difference when making those models on weekdays, but she didn't figure out why it was like this. Because the three sides of the triangle are connected end to end, It forms a very stable structure. You can find out by doing a force analysis. As Lin En said this, he took a few wooden strips and assembled them into triangles, quadrilaterals and pentagons, and then pulled any of their sides and any of their corners to demonstrate the force changes of these polygons. Lydia sat on the wing of the aircraft, staring at the wooden strips and Lin En's hand with bright eyes, like a student listening to a class. For a moment, she even forgot that Lin En in front of her was only a meeting for the second time. However, Lin En's course was not so easy to understand. There was a demonstration of wooden strips in the first half, and Lydia could understand some of it. After that, she was confused by the explanation of the center of gravity, wind resistance, and friction. Only two conclusions were drawn. First, the wizard in front of him was very knowledgeable and knew a lot of things. Second, whether the aircraft can fly may be related to these forces. After talking for a while, Lin En smacked his lips, and the halfling girl immediately understood, jumped off the wing, ran to the room, took the kettle and poured a glass of water, handed it to Lin En, and then looked at her eagerly and asked, "Then wizard, can this aircraft fly now?" "If you just want to stay in the sky for a while, then there is no problem, but if you want to fly freely in the sky, I'm afraid it won't work." Lin En shook his head. "The power of this aircraft is too poor, and the shape and structure don't conform to fluid mechanics." The halfling girl looked confused. She could barely understand the power, but what is fluid mechanics? In just half an hour, she heard many high-end words that she had never heard of before. Lydia looked like a kitten who saw a plush ball but couldn't scratch it. She looked pitiful. "Master Wizard?" Darren on the side was a little worried and couldn't help but interrupt. Although he also wanted to hear this knowledge, he knew one thing clearly: all knowledge in the land of wizards is very precious. Lin En seemed to have just reacted, and a smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. "Sorry, this is a professional problem. I haven't introduced myself yet. My name is Lin En, and I'm the new professor of arcane mathematics at Yaita College." "Is that the professor of arcane mathematics who scared a student to faint on the first day of class?" Darren exclaimed. The corner of Lin En's mouth twitched involuntarily, and he looked at Darren very kindly. "If you can't speak, then you'd better shut up. P.S. The data from the first few days of each week are very important, especially for follow-up reading. It is not easy to read a new book, so please support me. Thanks to bookfriend DSF23DD for the 1,500 starting coins, Ish and Daojun for the 500 starting coins, bookfriend 2020091707145718 for the 200 starting coins, bookfriend 202004011137433335, not a Shoto but a Sao Nai An. Change your name for 100 starting coins, bookfriend 13032915160668 for the 4 starting coins, bookfriend 2021103061254610 for the 2 starting coins. Chapter 67 Lin's Airship. Under Lin En's extremely kind gaze, Darren swallowed hard and shut up immediately. Lydia seemed to have remembered something and asked in surprise, "Professor Lin En, did Master Helram ask you to come?" "Have I passed the test?" "My purpose of coming here has nothing to do with Master Helram." Lin En rejected the girl's guess, and then spoke again in the other's disappointed expression. "I want to ask you to make something." As he spoke, Lin En took out a page of parchment from his pocket and handed it over. Lydia reached out to take it and looked at it for a few times, and couldn't help but exclaimed, "So beautiful." On the parchment roll was a very large, novel-looking alchemical machine. The top looked like an inverted elliptical sphere, and the bottom was connected by ropes, similar to the hull of a ship. Even the internal structure diagram was drawn very clearly. The overall framework was complicated but not messy, revealing a strange sense of beauty. "What is this? Is it the latest alchemical ship?" Lydia asked in surprise. She saw propellers and rudders on it, which are things that ships use. "It's called an airship," Lin En answered. At first, he actually made a hot air balloon. This is the simplest way to fly into the sky without magic, but after careful consideration, he gave up this idea and simply prepared to make an airship that can sail far away in one step. The purpose is naturally not just to look good. He has inquired about it in the past few days. Although some three-ring wizards who are proficient in elements and plasticity can fly in the sky, the consumption is too great, the flight altitude is limited, and the speed is not fast. Only great wizards can stay in the air for a long time, and generally they will not use it as a means of traveling. The island under their feet is very large, with many mines. The entire wizard city is built next to a huge magic mine in the center of the island. Land transportation from all over the place is actually not easy. For example, if you use camels to load a batch of goods from the port of Yaita and go around the mountain road to the wizard's land, it will take 7 or 8 days, and you may encounter monsters on the way. If you start from the air, it will be different. At least you can shorten the time by half. Although the airship's carrying capacity is not large, it is still very cost-effective to transport some important materials or new things that the wizard city does not have. In addition, the steam airship itself is also a commodity. As long as you put 2 magic crystal cannons on it and add some protective spells, it will be a mobile air fortress. It's easy to sell this thing for thousands of magic gold coins. As for the problem of technology leakage, there is no need to worry in the short term. As long as he can make a steam airship and fly it in the sky, he can apply to the Parliament for alchemical patent protection. Yes, there is a protection mechanism for the production formula of various magic items in the wizard's land, and only in this way can wizards publish the results of their hard research. In fact, in addition to alchemical items, those high-level magics are also the same. Even as a professor in his college, he can only learn some low-level magic for free. As for the long term, there is no need to worry. What he has brought out are just low-level toys. After a few years, when the situation of the wizard land is understood, the internal combustion engine will be directly developed. The so-called steam airship will be as slow as a snail in the sky. Airship? A ship that flies in the sky? Lydia asked impatiently. Yes, that's about it. Lin En nodded. Lydia immediately felt like she had found some treasure, and her eyes flashed with excitement. But she soon discovered that there were no wings like wings on the design of this airship. Only a small propeller, which provided power that was definitely not enough for the airship to float. It should only be used to adjust the course. Can this thing really fly? Lydia asked curiously. Does it need to cast some kind of magic? Of course it can fly, Lin En said very confidently, and then continued to ask with a smile. Do you know why wood can float on the water? Lydia shook her head in confusion. Isn't it common sense that wood can float on the water? Lin En explained. Because the same volume of wood is lighter than water, that is to say, its density is less than that of water, and the weight of the water it displaces is greater than its own weight, so the buoyancy it receives is greater than its gravity. You can give it a try. Not only wood, but anything with the same properties can float on the water, while on the contrary they will fall into the water, and the airship can fly into the sky, just like the wood floating on the water. As long as the density of the gas in the air chamber is less than the normal atmosphere, then flying will naturally not be a problem. Lydia listened very carefully and nodded as if she understood. Then when we sit on the airship, it is just like sitting on a boat, and we are lifted into the sky with the help of this very light gas, right? Your comprehension ability is very good, but the knowledge you know is really too little. If you can take a few more of my Olympiad classes, maybe you can also design your own aircraft, Lin En said with emotion. Hearing what Lin En said, Lydia's originally happy expression immediately stagnated, and then she had a sad face. She had to join the Yaita Academy to learn these knowledge, but the key was that she had to fly to the sky first to pass the assessment. This looked like an endless dead loop. If you can perfectly follow the design drawings and make the airship, then for the first flight, I can consider letting you drive it, Lin En said with a smile. I remember that the agreement between you and Master Helram was to fly in the sky without using magic, which barely meets the requirements. Can I really drive it? Lydia jumped up excitedly, and then bumped into the frame of the wing. The pain made her tears roll in her eyes, but she still covered her head and looked at Lin En eagerly. Of course, but let me say one thing first. My requirements are very high, Lin En said freely, although one of his purposes this time was to fool. Cough. recruit this halfling girl as his assistant to help him make and sell those novel creations, so as to save more time to study magic. But the way of doing things is also very important. If you just go to the door and invite others to help, it will only arouse suspicion and will not achieve good results. Only by forcing others to fight for the opportunity through their own efforts will people cherish it and will be more serious when studying mathematical Olympiad in the future. Chapter 68. Excited Wizard Apprentices. Just as Lin En thought, the extremely high requirements did not scare Lydia away. Instead, the halfling girl was full of fighting spirit and took a serious look at the design. After learning that the airship needed some light and tough materials, Lydia immediately proposed to use camel leather that had been soaked in water and dried to make the airbag of the airship. This material met the requirements very well and was usually used on the sails of large warships. On the misty sea, the sail of the warship they drove was made of camel leather. No matter how big the storm was, it could not be destroyed. It was very durable and reliable. The frame of the airbag of the airship could be made of the branches of the magic tongue tree, which had high tensile, compressive and bending strengths. Lydia talked endlessly. In the field of aircraft design, she was far inferior to Lin En, but she knew the characteristics of various materials in the other world very well. Lin En silently calculated in his mind that if the airship was made according to the materials Lydia mentioned, the performance of the airship would definitely be improved a lot. But the cost would also become extremely high. At least 100 magic gold coins are needed. Lin En thought about his savings and coughed twice, interrupting the girl's words. Actually, this airship is just an experimental version. It doesn't use such good materials. It's okay if it's almost the same. How can that be possible? This is the first airship that can fly and turn in the sky, Lydia said with longing. I can only give you 12 magic gold coins as a deposit, Lin En said helplessly and took out a purse. This was one of his few assets. The rest of the money can only be filled by applying for some teaching funds from Hellroom when there are more students in the Olympiad mathematics class. Lydia shook her head and didn't accept it. The new knowledge that Lin En explained to her alone was worth more than 100 magic gold coins. Not to mention that this airship was directly related to whether she could enter the Aida Magic Academy. The money from making the airship can be regarded as the tuition for the lecture just now. I will use the best materials to make it. Let's start now. Lydia wiped the stains on her face and asked Darren to call the other halflings in the workshop. She wanted to complete the construction of the airship within a month. Seeing the halflings busy, Lin En wanted to help, but was stopped. The use of magic might leave traces. It would be bad if Master Hellrim thought that the airship was suspected of being made by magic. Moreover, Lin En was the main customer, and there was no reason for the customer to do it himself. In view of this, Lin En, who had nothing to do, could only be in charge of directing, watching those halflings who were only half his height, running around carrying wood that was heavier than themselves. The progress of the airship was faster than Lin En had imagined. After working all night, 1/6 of the overall frame had been built. If it weren't for the large amount of camel leather used to make the airbags, which needed special processing and took a lot of time, it would probably take less than a month to build the airship. However, such a fast progress was not without a price. The halflings were almost exhausted. They had put all their enthusiasm into the work. Darren was lying on a solid wooden board and snoring. Lydia was even more exaggerated. She slept directly on the frame of the airship, holding a beam tightly, with saliva on the corners of her mouth, and muttering something from time to time. Lin En shook his head and immediately stopped several halflings who were still busy. He moved Lydia and others who had fallen asleep into the house and asked them to have a good rest. After becoming a wizard apprentice, not sleeping for a night did not affect Lin En's spirit at all. So after settling Lydia, who had fallen asleep due to excessive fatigue, he left the workshop directly. After a whole day, Lin En was looking forward to whether the wizard apprentices could solve the exponential formula he left behind. Pushing the door and walking into the classroom, the confiscated coins were piled up on the desk. What surprised Lin En was that the classroom, which seemed a little empty in the last class, was now packed. A rough glance showed that there were as many as 150 or 60 people. If this classroom was not big enough, I am afraid that there would be no room for them. Is an exponential game so useful? Good morning, everyone. Lin En's mind was full of thoughts, but he did not show it on the surface. However, the students' reactions were more enthusiastic than he imagined. Professor Lin En, are there any other Olympiad math problems? I have calculated all the numbers for the 36 squares and 49 squares. Looking at the extremely excited wizard apprentices in the classroom, Lin En was completely shocked. Could it be that the students of Vyayanta Magic Academy were all a group of them? They actually had such a high enthusiasm for doing math problems. No, something must have happened that I didn't know about. Lin En thought so, but he was not in a hurry to confirm it. Instead, he turned to look at Alok and asked, "It's been a day now. I believe you should have the answer, right?" "Alok, Professor, the sum of these 36 squares is 68,719,476,735. Alok stood up and answered tremblingly. He had confirmed this value many times and calculated it on 20 pages. But the final amount was too large. He only had one chance to answer. If he made a mistake, it would be a disaster. Under Alok's anxious gaze, Lin En nodded. "Very good. The answer is correct. Then have you figured out the meaning of the formula I gave you?" Lin En asked again. "I have calculated that the sum of the squares is equal to twice the last digit minus 1. Alok said confidently. After he no longer had tens of billions of debts, his lost confidence was restored. In order to get the correct result yesterday, he calculated for a whole night, and it was during the repeated confirmation that he found this trick. Lin En nodded again. Without much mathematical foundation, it was barely qualified to find this pattern in one day. "Professor Lin En, can I get the bonus?" Alok asked expectantly. Pierce and others looked at Alok with envy. That was a full 20 magic gold coins. Although they calculated for a long time yesterday, they were not as desperate as the other party, and they could not find this pattern first. Lin En naturally knew that Helram had set a bounty for the formula he wrote, but because of the professor's modesty, he couldn't take it himself. But it's still too far to get the money just by finding the pattern. "Alok, my summation formula is not that simple. What do you say, if I slightly modify the rules of the grid game, such as the number of the next square must be 3 times that of the previous square? Is your theory still applicable?" Lin En asked with a smile. The smug expression on Alok's face froze, and he immediately started to do mental arithmetic in his mind, and then picked up a feather pen to write and draw on the papyrus. "What if there is another rule that you need to put 17 copper coins in the first grid?" Lin En asked again. Alok completely collapsed, and his mind was filled with a huge amount of numbers. "This is too difficult. He can't figure it out at all. P.S. I want everything for the new book. Thanks to book friend Sir Twilight Sword for the 5,000 starting coins, Infinite Fantasy Township for the 500 starting coins, Pterosaur Brother for the 200 starting coins, and book friends 20220702132423100 and 20220214153251180 for the 100 starting coins. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelist. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 69. How many math problems did you solve to achieve what you have today? Lin En's 2 short sentences sent Alok down from heaven to hell. The students present shuddered. Mathematical Olympiad is an extremely sophisticated course. We need to find the rules in a large amount of extremely complicated data calculations, and then summarize them into corresponding formulas to simplify the algorithm and improve the efficiency of the entire calculation. Lin En looked around at everyone in the classroom, paused, and spoke again. The rules summarized by Alok are certainly not wrong, but the scope of application is too small. Since the exponential increase in the square can be 2 times, it can also be 3 times, 5 times, and 10 times. In this way, this rule is no longer applicable, and this exponential summation formula is applicable to all exponential increases that meet the conditions. Lin En snapped his fingers, and under the surge of magic power, the complicated formula appeared in front of everyone again. When Q equals 1, Sn equals A11 Qn. 1Q. Johnny, Pierce and others stared at the so-called exponential summation formula, thinking hard for a while, and then picked up their quills to calculate, listing the series of 2, 3, and 4 times, looking for the rules in them, and then trying to substitute them into this formula, with Elrock's previous summary, and deducing through Q equals 1. Pierce quickly realized that this symbol should refer to the multiple of the increase, but why use 1 to subtract? Pierce bit his finger and substituted the initial twofold growth square game into it, and ignored the following, 1Q, and directly performed the calculation. He found that it was completely feasible. But the number obtained was exactly the opposite, a negative number. In other words, the function of the following formula is to convert a negative number into a positive number. However, if it is replaced with a threefold exponential growth, the amount will be completely wrong. Pierce's brain was working rapidly, and he had already vaguely captured the answer, almost, just a little bit. But what is it? In the whole classroom, there are many people like Pierce who are busy doing the questions. Some are pulling their hair, some are scratching their heads, but no one chooses to slack off and give up. Is the learning atmosphere of Yayata Magic Academy so strong? Lin En was somewhat strange. These people love learning too much. Most of the class passed quickly. Just when Lin En thought that there would be no results today, a hand was raised high. Professor Lin En, I have some ideas. It was Johnny who spoke. After receiving the instruction, the girl stood up and spoke. The A1 in the summation formula should refer to the number of the first square, Q refers to the multiple, and N corresponds to the number of squares, right, Professor? About correct. After class, you can go to the entrance of the academy to collect your reward. Lin En nodded in response. Although Johnny's statement was very general, it was indeed accurate. Pierce on the side couldn't help but beat his chest and stamp his feet. After Johnny's reminder, he soon understood why. He was just a little short. He was about to solve it. After waving his hand to let Johnny sit down, Lin En explained to the apprentices present what a geometric sequence is, as well as its general term and summation formula, and then talked about how each formula was derived. The wizard apprentices below picked up the quill pen very seriously, wrote down every word Lin En said on the page, and then tried to change the first term and multiples to verify repeatedly. The desk was soon filled with all kinds of manuscripts. It must be said that after having the general term formula and the summation formula, the speed of calculation is several times faster, and the more complex the formula is, the faster it improves. Looking at these students who are more active in doing the questions, Lin En can't help but sigh that it's too easy for him to be a professor. If the schools in the Federation are all like this, why worry about the lack of technology? The second mathematical Olympiad class ended quickly. Alok and others left the classroom with a sense of satisfaction, still discussing the derivation of the summation formula. Johnny, from last night to now, how much has the magic power you can control increased? A black-haired witch apprentice came up, patted Johnny on the shoulder, and asked curiously, "About 10%? The silver-gray-haired girl thought about it and replied casually, "That's a little more than me." The black-haired witch apprentice curled her lips, but there was no envy. According to rumors, Alok worked all night without sleep, and the next day he woke up and found that the magic power he could control had increased by about 20%. It was because of this news that the entire Yayata Magic Academy exploded. So this morning, all the wizard apprentices who had no classes came, wanting to listen to what kind of magical power this so-called mathematical Olympiad class had, and she was no exception. The conclusion is also obvious. Complex and tedious math calculations can effectively exercise their brain power. This process of logical deduction, finding and cracking numerical patterns is also interesting, at least more interesting than boring meditation. Johnny ignored the words of the black-haired witch. He looked back at the direction of the classroom and secretly wondered how many math problems Lin En had done in the Secret Law Society in the past 6 months to achieve today's achievements. Doing math problems can actually improve the wizard's control over magic power. Lin En certainly heard the voices of the students' discussion clearly, and was also somewhat surprised. But thinking about it carefully, it seems normal. The reason why his strength increased greatly when he connected with the intelligent brain was because the overload mode greatly enhanced his computing power, or mental power. This is extremely important for wizards, because the amount of magic power they can control is closely related to the strength of the wizard's own mental power. What makes Lin En a little helpless is that this happens to be his knowledge blind spot. At least the process of forming a spell position is a bit like repeatedly practicing an action to form muscle memory. For example, if you pick up a wine glass from the table and drink it, if it is done by artificial intelligence, you need to first determine the distance, calculate the angle and strength of holding the water glass, and then analyze the most natural arc when you pick up the water glass and hand it to your mouth. Such a complicated process can be completed instantly under the control of the subconscious mind without any hindrance. The same is true for spells. As long as you practice for a long time, a thought can release extremely complex magic. There is only a prerequisite, that is, the wizard's mental power is strong and can provide enough computing power, otherwise the casting process will be prolonged, thus revealing flaws. Thinking of this, Lin En touched his chin, wondering whether he should give himself a few advanced math problems to calculate. Maybe it will really be useful. Chapter 70 Professor O Mathematics Smile. Half a month passed in a flash. Since crossing into this different world, Lin En had spent the most comfortable days. In the morning, he taught a few Olympiad math classes in the Yayata Magic Academy. In the afternoon, he went to the Halfling workshop to check the progress of the airship. As for the evening, he did some advanced math problems and practiced the newly developed magic, liquid nitrogen ice field. It must be said that doing problems is still useful. The growth rate of mental power is much faster than before. The only disadvantage is that every time I go out, I feel a little nervous. The teaching progress of the Olympiad math class is also faster than Lin En imagined. After just 4 days, a single exponential sum formula can no longer satisfy the appetite of those wizard apprentices. They are all looking forward to more complex Olympiad math problems. Lin En had to take out the second killer, that is square root. If exponential growth is difficult for these wizard apprentices, square root is a pure nightmare. The students who were looking forward to the new content suddenly wailed. Whenever someone passed by the Olympiad classroom, they could always hear some strange words coming out of it. No, I can't do it. I can't do it. Impossible. It's not my fault. There must be something wrong with the formula. There is no solution to this problem. Within 2 days of the course, Alok and others said it was too difficult and unbearable. They couldn't do the square root. The so-called long division method and continued fraction method were all used, but more than half of the students were still slow. A new term was circulated in the Yayata Magic Academy, called the smile of the Olympiad professor. It was rumored that once Professor Lin En smiled, no one in the whole classroom would be able to laugh. In this regard, Lin En was very helpless. Even learning to do the square root was so difficult, and he would go crazy when learning calculus in the future. In the next few days, he could only start teaching from geometry. Considering that everyone's learning progress was different, he even differentiated into elite classes and ordinary classes. After finishing a new Olympiad class, when Lin En was about to leave, he was blocked by Philip. Professor Lin, the Wizard Council and the Commissioner of Magic Weekly will come to Yayata Harbor in the next 2 days. You'd better prepare in advance. Philip reminded. Are you here for the law of free fall? Lin was a little surprised at first, but soon reacted. Yes, and your planetary theory. Master Helram has reported these theories, but whether they will be published depends on the Commissioner of Magic Weekly. Philip nodded. What about the Wizard Council? What are they sending people to do? Lin asked curiously. It shouldn't be the same thing. They are here to assess your wizard level, Philip explained. In the wizard land, the title of a former wizard is not only a symbol of strength, but also a status and privilege, and this status can only be granted by the Wizard Council. Generally speaking, if it is confirmed that an outside wizard will stay in the wizard land for a long time, the council will send someone to confirm the other party's identity and wizard level. In addition, there is a period of observation. If it is determined that the outside wizard will not threaten this place, the official wizard's badge and robe will be issued to the other party. Seeing that Lin En looked a little worried, Philip hurriedly comforted him. "You don't need to worry too much about this. You are very good at studying arcane mathematics. It will be no problem for you to pass the observation period." Lin En nodded. In fact, he was not worried about the observation period. After all, he was not going to do anything bad in the wizard land. What really worried him was the assessment of the official wizard. When he joined Yaita College, Halrim did not test his wizard level. Lin En thought that the other party had acquiesced. Unexpectedly, this thing was actually assessed by the parliament. Even though Lin En has been doing high-intensity exercises for more than half a month, it still takes several days to reach the limit of magic power growth. That is why he has not been anxious about how to obtain the source of magic power. "How do you measure the wizard level in the wizard land?" Lin En asked tentatively. "Generally speaking, wizards who have passed the first to third rings of the test all use magic balls, and there will be basically no mistakes. Of course, if you are a great wizard, that thing will naturally be useless." Philip joked cheerfully, and then curiously asked how the levels were assessed in the secret society. "In the secret society, there are only scholar levels, no strength ratings. Identity is not important. The only thing worth exchanging is knowledge." Lin En said nonsense casually. Hearing this, Philip couldn't help but yearn for it. Perhaps only in such a place can a former wizard like himself communicate with a great wizard or even a legendary wizard on an equal footing, and tell his own views and conjectures about the world. "Then what are the requirements for joining the secret society?" Philip lowered his voice and asked quietly. According to Lin En, the secret society should be just a small group that exchanges knowledge with each other, and will not force members to do something they don't want to do. Joining such a society seems to have only benefits and no disadvantages. You must first hand over a new piece of knowledge to prove your ability, and you also need a recommendation from a higher level person. Lin En patiently added to the lie, and stated that after coming to the wizard land, he temporarily lost contact with the secret law society, so that Philip would give up this idea. After all, there is no secret law society in the Secus Empire. He can't just conjure one up, right? After a lot of deception, Philip left with some regrets. Lin En secretly breathed a sigh of relief. The lie he made up to deal with Halrim's criticism brought him a lot of convenience, but it also caused a lot of hidden dangers. While thinking about the strategy in his mind, Lin En walked towards the half-body workshop to check the progress of the airship. As soon as he stepped into the door, Lin En bumped into Lydia, who ran out in a hurry. If you only look at the height, this is simply a dwarf bumping into a giant, but the result is just the opposite. Lin En took several steps back to stabilize his body and not fall to the ground. Lydia looked fine, and excitedly dragged Lin En's arm and pulled him inside. "Come with me, Professor Lin En." After working overtime day and night for more than half a month, their airship has been completed ahead of schedule. P.S. Please support my new book. Chapter 71 Confidential. This is all confidential. 2 days later, a convoy pulled by several strong camels slowly walked on the official road of the harbor city. In the front of the convoy, in a luxuriously decorated carriage, an old wizard was staring out the window, looking at the architectural layout of the entire city. "Mr. Tick, do you think this continent is really a sphere?" Beside him, a gorgeously dressed wizard was staring at a gold coin tossed in his hand, asking curiously, "Roll, before it is thoroughly verified." "I'm afraid no one can really confirm or refute this conjecture." Tick took a long time to move his eyes away from the rows of houses of the same length and width, and then continued to speak. "It is rumored that in the parliament, there is a legendary wizard who is proficient in elemental studies. After knowing this conjecture, he is ready to use flying magic to fly high in the sky to confirm whether the continent is round or flat." "What's the result?" Luo asked with great curiosity. "Until we set off, that adult has not returned," Tick said, shaking his head. "It's been a few days, right?" Could it be? Luo couldn't help but shudder, but then he denied this idea. Although he had never really seen the power of the legendary wizard, he knew that it was definitely beyond imagination. It seemed that the safety of these big men was not something that a small character like him could worry about. Anyway, once this news is released, all the wizards of the prophecy school will probably quarrel. Tick said with emotion. Those wizards of the prophecy school always try to analyze the revelation of fate from the orbit of the galaxy. The star map widely circulated in the wizard land is from their hands, and Lin En's planetary theory is undoubtedly a complete refutation of this theory. Tick is naturally happy to see this. In his opinion, the prophecy school is completely wasting the funds of the parliament. It only comes up with some confusing words, and then after the incident, it explains each word based on facts, making it unclear whether it is a successful prophecy or a lie made up on the spot. Lin didn't care much about the ideas of the prophet. He was thinking about another theory mentioned by the wizard named Lin En, the law of free fall. The acceleration of an object's fall has nothing to do with its weight and mass. When two objects of different masses fall from the same height, they will land at the same time. Although this theory has been verified by some great wizards, it is still a bit too abnormal and unbelievable. Could it be that if a small stone and a whole mountain are moved to the sky, they will also fall to the ground at the same time? Lin tried to toss the gold coin and a feather pen in his hand. There is no doubt that the gold coin with a larger mass fell first. Just as he was thinking, the convoy slowly stopped. What's going on? Lin asked with a little dissatisfaction. It should not have reached the Aida Magic Academy yet, Master Wizard. The road ahead is blocked. The servant driving the camel hurriedly explained. Lin opened the curtain of the car and immediately saw countless townspeople gathered in the square, seemingly discussing something. What happened? Tick asked. He also heard the noisy sound outside. Tick looked forward, taking advantage of the height difference brought by the carriage. The huge and strange alchemical machine in the center of the square soon appeared in front of the two people. This thing is as high as 2 floors, and the whole is divided into 2 parts. On the top is an inverted oval sphere. The length is estimated to be more than 20 meters, and below is something similar to a ship, but it looks much smaller, less than 1/3 of the size of the oval sphere, and is tied in the middle with a solid rope. Is this the alchemical machine recently developed by Master Helram? It's so big, Lin said with emotion. It is even bigger than the golems in the wizard city. No, I think it has nothing to do with Sir Helram, Tick retorted after listening to the noisy discussions around him. The most mentioned by the townspeople here are Lin En, Lydia, and something called an airship. Airship. Is this the name of this alchemical machine? So, is it related to the wizard from the Sekka's empire? It's really interesting. Let's walk over and take a look. Lin got off the carriage and said with interest. On the other side, in the center of the city square, Lydia and the airship she made were surrounded by the onlookers. Whether they were 7 or 8-year-old children or strong farmers, they all wanted to touch this huge thing that was taller than a house. A dozen halflings surrounded the airship like guards, with proud expressions on their faces. This was a treasure they had spent more than half a month to make. A naughty boy secretly climbed up the sculpture, struggled to stand up, raised his hand high, poked the bottom of the airbag of the airship, felt the soft touch, and found that he could not pierce the seemingly weak airbag at all, so he retracted his hand, but his eyes were always fixed on the big airship in front of him. Aha, it's so soft. The other naughty children also climbed up curiously, touched the airship with their rough hands, and shouted excitedly. Darren was immediately startled and jumped up, trying to drive the other party away, but he was too short, and he couldn't reach it even if he jumped up. He could only scold with an embarrassed face. Go away, don't break it, I can't afford to sell you. Although the airbag made of camel leather is very strong and difficult to cut with a knife, they have paid all their energy and savings for this flight experiment, and they will not allow the slightest mistake. Uncle Darren, how did you pull such a big thing here? It's called an airship. Can it really fly? The leading boy was not afraid of Darren, who was not as tall as him, and asked with a smile. The crowd watching was also extremely curious. Judging from its appearance, this thing called an airship must weigh tens of thousands of pounds, but Lydia and others were able to move it all the way from the workshop on the west side to the square. You guys don't understand. This thing only looks big, but it's not heavy at all. No, that can't be said. It's not heavy to push. I heard from the wizard that this is because the lift offsets most of the gravity, plus the pulley at the bottom, so it's not tiring to move, Darren said proudly. His beard was raised, but before he finished speaking, Lydia stepped heavily on him. Only then did he react and immediately changed his expression. He stared at everyone present as if he was guarding against thieves, and said with a serious expression, "Secret. This is all confidential." Chapter 72. This is definitely a scene in the history of magic that deserves to be remembered forever. Darren's words made the townspeople present feel itchy, but there was nothing they could do. They could only speculate whether this airship could fly, how long it could fly, and whether it would fall to the ground before it could rise to a high altitude like the previous aircraft. At this moment, the professors and students of Yaita College were gathered in the center of the square, staring at the huge airship parked in the center of the square. Even Helram was amazed at its huge size. After a pause, he turned his head and looked at Lin En and said, "What a delicate alchemical creation." "I heard that this is your work, Professor Lin En," Lin En explained with a smile. "I only provided a drawing." The production process of the airship was completed by Lydia and others. It should be said that this airship was made by us together. Although Lin En said this, Helram and others knew that production was only secondary. For any alchemical creation, its design principle is the most important. "Professor Lin, since you call this thing an airship, you don't really intend to make it fly, do you?" "How much magic power will it consume?" Kevin asked curiously. "The bigger and heavier the object, the harder it is to fly into the sky. This can almost be said to be an iron rule. If you want to send such a huge alchemical instrument into the sky, the magic power consumed is probably incalculable." "I think you are wrong. It is not magic to make this thing fly." Lin shook his head. "Not magic?" Hearing this, the professors and students present were stunned for a moment. "Could it be that this thing can fly by itself? Is this the aircraft that you said last time to change the power and redesign the structure?" Helram immediately thought of what Lin said when he first crossed the sea to the wizard's land. He did not feel any magic fluctuations on the airship. "No, if you must say, this airship uses another way of flying." Lin thought for a while and answered. Helram frowned, thinking about what the so-called other way meant, and then asked with interest, "Then how long do you think it can stay in the sky?" 10 minutes? An hour? I think it will be longer than any number you can imagine. How long it can fly depends on how long Lydia wants to stay in the sky." Lin En replied with a smile. Philip and others were immediately upset when they heard this. "Doesn't this mean that if Lydia doesn't want to come down, she can fly in the sky forever? This is unreasonable. You know, flying is a feat that only a few wizards can do." But before they could refute, a voice sounded from behind. "You mean this airship can stay in the air continuously without consuming any energy? This is impossible. It is completely inconsistent with the law of conservation of magic." Lin En looked back in surprise, and then saw two gorgeously dressed wizards walking towards them. "This is Mr. Tick, a member of the Wizard Council." Philip hurriedly introduced him to Lin En, with a little more respect in his tone. Although Tick was a three-ring wizard like him, his alchemy level was very high, and his status in the wizard land was not much lower than that of an ordinary great wizard. As for the other one, Philip hesitated. "My name is Luo. I'm a commissioner sent by Magic Weekly." Luo replied politely. "Hello, Mr. Tick." "Mr. Luo." Lin En nodded. He was surprisingly familiar with the name Tick. A first-ring magic he had learned was called Tick's farsightedness. "Stop being polite. You haven't answered my question just now." Tick had no intention of chatting at all, and asked eagerly, "If it only refers to floating in the air, of course there is no need to consume extra energy." Lin En explained and continued, "As for the principle, I can only say, this is a trade secret." Tick's expression froze immediately, and then turned into a somewhat helpless look. As an alchemist, he certainly knew that there were some things he shouldn't ask. "Professor Lin, the inspection work has been completed, and the Overlook can take off at any time." Lydia trotted over, made a sailing salute, and said loudly, "Then we can start now." Lin said, waving his hand. Lydia, who got the nod, immediately excitedly called Darren and others, and began to fill the auxiliary airbag of the airship with hydrogen, and put a sturdy rope on several pillars in the square to prevent it from flying away in advance. The airbag above the airship looks seamless, but in fact it is divided into two main and auxiliary airbags. Only when the main airbag is filled with hydrogen, the lift force on the airship is slightly less than the gravity, which is at a critical point, So as long as the auxiliary airbag is also filled with hydrogen, it can fly directly. When landing, it is necessary to open the auxiliary airbags in reverse to let air flow in, and the airship will slowly fall. As for why hydrogen is used instead of the safer helium, of course it is because the former is easier to obtain and can be separated directly from the water. The most abundant thing in the Aida harbor is water. While Darren and others were filling the auxiliary airbags with gas, Lydia had already climbed into the cabin of the airship on the ladder, pulled the alchemical eyepiece on her head, and put her hands on the big steering wheel, looking like a captain, with an unstoppable excitement on her face. The eyes of everyone in the square were focused on it. As the hydrogen in the auxiliary airbags increased, the huge airship began to shake slowly and floated up little by little. Great! It can really fly. Really, our efforts have not been in vain. Seeing this scene, several halflings hugged each other excitedly. They have been working day and night for the past half-month for this day. Overlook, take off. Lydia swung her knife to cut the rope connecting the airship to the column and shouted loudly. In the eyes of countless people, some excited and some shocked, the huge thing in front of them quickly broke free from the constraints of gravity and flew straight into the sky. Amazing, Halrim said with emotion as he stared at the airship that was drifting farther and farther in the sky. Roll on the side quickly took out a feather pen and used magic as ink to quickly draw all the scenes he saw. This is definitely a scene in the history of magic that deserves to be remembered forever. A halfling who doesn't know any magic, riding a huge airship that is taller than a 2-story building, flew into the sky. Chapter 73 Touch the clouds in the sky. 2 in 1. It's unbelievable. This thing actually flew. If the soaring airship was a surprise to the wizards, then it was a shock to the townspeople watching, because everyone knew Lydia, a noisy halfling who always liked to tinker with strange things. The most important thing was that she, like all the ordinary townspeople present, didn't know magic at all. And now, Lydia was right in front of them, driving something bigger than a house, flying straight into the sky, doing something that even many wizards couldn't do. Dad, can I fly to the sky in the future? The boy who had just climbed up the sculpture to touch the airship looked at the man in the gray robe and asked excitedly, "What are you thinking?" "I'm sure some wizard must have secretly cast a spell on the airship." The gray-robed man didn't believe that a halfling could fly by his own power. In the land of wizards, all miracles belong to the power of magic. Who said it was magic? Darren was immediately unhappy when he heard this, and corrected him angrily. "I guarantee that every part of this airship was made by us halflings, without using any magic." When Lydia comes down from the sky, you can also go to the airship to take a look. As long as you pay 10 silver coins, anyone can take an airship for a spin in the sky. I heard from Lord Lin that this thing can fly very high, even higher than many clouds. If you have the chance, you may even be able to touch the clouds in the sky. Darren said very complacently, "Can it fly higher than the clouds?" The children in the square couldn't help but look up at the sky, looking at the huge airship that was getting farther and farther away from them, imagining what it would feel like to touch the clouds. It was so white, it must be as soft as sheep's wool, right? The other townspeople were also somewhat tempted. Such a huge alchemical machine must cost a lot of money. It didn't seem very expensive to fly up to the sky for only 10 silver coins. You know, that's the sky. At the same time, hundreds of meters above the sky, Lydia was standing on a special chair, looking down, looking at the dense crowd in the square getting farther and farther away from her, turning into small dots, and finally the whole picture of the port city appeared in front of her. Everything was so small, just like the wooden models she placed in the workshop, as if she could crush them with one foot. Is this what it feels like to fly into the sky? It's amazing. Lydia looked around, and excitedly looked at the continuous mountains and the vast sea in the distance. Although she had risen into the sky in a simple aircraft more than 10 days ago, the height was only about tens of meters, and she didn't dare to be distracted at all. Unlike now, there is no need for her to control it at all. The airship can float in the air spontaneously, and she can do whatever she wants here. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew, and the originally stable airship swayed slightly in the wind. People who fly into the sky for the first time often have an unreasonable fear in their hearts, but Lydia was not afraid at all. Instead, She bravely climbed to the edge of the airship, spread her arms, faced the strong wind, and screamed to vent her excitement, until she saw a white cloud floating not far from the airship. Lydia, who had a bold idea in her mind, jumped down and sat back in her seat, holding the rudder, and drove the airship directly towards the cloud. The huge airship hit the cloud head-on and passed through it. Lydia's eyes were covered with white, and her cheeks and arms were wet. It felt like standing on the beach and being blown by the melodious sea breeze. "This must be a happy cloud," Lydia said with a smile. However, while playing, the half-orc girl did not forget the task that Lin En had given her. After driving the airship for a while, she hovered over the square again and pulled the wrench next to her. The wooden board at the bottom of the airship immediately popped open, and 2 balls with a mass difference of dozens of times fell from the cabin. However, due to the restraint of the rope, they hovered in the air again, swaying left and right, pulling the airship slightly tilted. Then the half-orc girl pulled the alchemical eyepiece in front of her eyes and stuck her head out to wait for Lin En's gestures and orders. This eyepiece is the only magic item she carries. It has a long-sighted magic that can make her eyes as sharp as a griffin. She can clearly see Professor Lin En in the crowd from a distance of 2 kilometers. It seems that the next issue of Magic Weekly will definitely sell well. 10 minutes ago, Roll, who was in the square, drew the accompanying picture with great satisfaction and added his own feelings at the bottom. He already had a rough expectation of the sales of the newspaper in his mind. Lin En leaned in to take a look. There were 3 pictures drawn on the papyrus, which were the scenes of Lydia boarding the airship, cutting the rope, and flying into the sky. Although the time was limited and only a few outlines were drawn, the pictures were already vivid. The sketching technique was no different from that of a human printer. No wonder the other party could become a specialist of Magic Weekly. After such a delay, the airship had already flown high into the sky. From this side, it looked like a small dot. "This is too high." Theodore looked up and looked at the airship in astonishment as it continued to climb into the sky. At first, he thought that even if this thing could fly, it would only be a few hundred meters high at most. But he didn't expect that in just a short while, the height of the airship had exceeded 2,000 meters. Fortunately, the difficulty of practicing far-sighted magic is not high. Most of the wizards present can do it, so they can still see clearly even at such a long distance. The airship stopped after rising to an altitude of 2,500 meters, and then used the thrust of steam to drive the propeller at the rear of the cabin and slowly moved forward. It can not only fly, but also drive, and it drives very steadily. This height is probably beyond the attack range of most magic. Tick looked at the floating airship from a distance. His expression became a little solemn. In a sense, this thing is a war weapon. With 2 magic crystal cannons hanging on it, it can carry out long-range attacks. If there are 20 airships equipped with magic crystal cannons, aerating the port of Yaida, without the intervention of the great wizard Helram, there is no doubt that the whole city will be reduced to ruins. What a delicate design, perfect and terrible. Helram is also very clear about this. He turned his head and looked at Lin En, and asked again. "The design of this airship should not be completed recently, right? If it is said that the simple aircraft made by Lydia half a month ago was a crudely made test product, then this airship is now a complete product. From takeoff to floating to driving, it is very stable, and the exterior design is also very sophisticated. It should be a very perfect technology. Yes, this airship was designed by me and several friends from the secret society, but it is difficult to find a suitable place for experimental flight in the territory of the Sekaz Empire," Lin En explained, and praised the wizard land a little. The wizards present nodded in agreement. "In the Sekaz Empire, wizards are hunted, so how dare they conduct flight experiments so openly? Since you have never tested it, how can you be sure that it can fly?" Tick asked in confusion. "Of course, because I have already calculated it in advance using the mathematical Olympiad," Lin En said straightforwardly. "As long as you know all the data and then go through precise calculations, there is no way you can go wrong." Before conducting this flight experiment, he had already verified that the gravity of this planet is almost the same as that of the Earth by weighing objects of different masses. Now the height of the airship is exactly the same as he predicted. and all these data can be derived in advance through the Mathematical Olympiad. Mathematical Olympiad. Tick muttered this term he had never known before. It seems that this time, in addition to issuing the official wizard's medal, it is also necessary to understand this thing called Mathematical Olympiad. He feels that this should be very important for alchemy. Kevin, Philip and other professors think that what Lin En said is a bit too absolute. Can the so-called Mathematical Olympiad really calculate everything? However, there is no way to refute it at this time, because the airship in front of him is the best proof. Lawyer took out a pen again and wrote down Lin En's words, preparing to enlarge and bold it as a title on one of the pages of Magic Weekly. Master Hiran Ram, can you cast a magic to temporarily turn this square into sand? Lin En stared at the sky for a while and suddenly said, yes, but can you tell me the reason? Hiram asked puzzledly. Now the height is enough. I plan to take this opportunity to do an experiment. If it is flat, I am afraid it will be more noisy, Lin En said freely. Experiment. Hiram paused, but soon realized what Lin En said, and immediately used the amplification magic to order everyone present to retreat 25 meters, leaving a wide enough space in the middle. A great wizard personally spoke, and no one dared to disobey. The townspeople present moved back one after another, and a circular area with a radius of 25 meters was soon left in the center of the originally crowded square. Hiram first released a large magic barrier to avoid accidents, and then cast a spell again. The solid floor tiles in front quickly cracked under the effect of magic, and finally decomposed into countless fine sand particles. Lin En took this opportunity to turn his head and look at the wizards and townspeople gathered in the square, and used the principle of sound wave transmission to increase his volume. Everyone, I believe that you must have heard of my law of free fall and planetary theory in the past half-month. I believe that many of you must have doubts about this, thinking that it is an absurd fantasy and a lie to attract attention. How can the continent be round? How can a piece of iron fall at the same time as a stone? But I have to say here, don't be confused by the appearance of things. The phenomena you see on a daily basis are just the effects of wind resistance. In fact, if the factor of air resistance is eliminated, the speed of an object's free fall has nothing to do with its weight or shape. Are you questioning Master Yade's theory? A young wizard in the crowd interrupted. The falling speed of an object is proportional to its weight and will also be affected by different shapes. This is almost common sense. There are too many examples in reality to prove that Master Yade's conclusion is correct. Then why don't we make a bet? Lin En raised his voice a few degrees. 10 minutes later, I will ask Lydia to lower the airship to about 40 meters. And then drop 2 iron balls of very different sizes and masses from the sky at the same time. Their weights differ by dozens of times, but I bet that the 2 balls will land at the same time, and the interval will not exceed 1 second. The bet is temporarily set at 3 magic gold coins, and anyone can participate, Lin En said with a smile. The purchasing power of 3 magic gold coins is equivalent to 50,000 to 60,000 yuan in the previous life. It is not a small amount for a wizard, but it is not to the point of physical pain. The young wizard threw the 3 gold coins over without thinking much. If Lin En is not lying, according to Master Yade's theory, the heavier iron ball must fall much faster than the small ball. There are many people who think like him, so in just a few minutes, more than 20 wizards participated in this bet, and Lawyer was no exception. He had deep doubts about this theory. Many townspeople were also eager to make a move, but not many people dared to participate in the wizard's bet. What about you? Are you going to give it a try? Lin En turned his head and looked at the students in the Mathematical Olympiad class behind him, and asked jokingly. Pierce and others hurriedly shook their heads, and Alok shuddered. The last time the professor opened a gambling game, he almost lost the wealth comparable to the entire Yayata harbor. In a blink of an eye, 69 magic gold coins were in hand. Lin En was also a little emotional. Sure enough, it would never be possible to get rich if you just get a salary. However, he used the airship to conduct free-fall experiments not only to make money, but more importantly to justify his theory. Although on the first day of arriving at Yayata harbor, he confirmed this in the college with the vacuum field created by Hiram. But it is too difficult to create a vacuum environment. Only a great wizard can do it, so this conclusion is limited to a small range of dissemination, and most people prefer to believe what they see in front of them. So Lin En is ready to take advantage of today to thoroughly confirm this theory with an experiment that no one can refute. Thanks to book friends Hun Dunhausen and Keeler for the reward of 600 Kidian coins, It's Really Lonely with You for the reward of 200 Kidian coins, and book friends 201812161126499405. It's strange if he is not a reader, and I appreciate your smiling face for the reward of 100 Kidian coins. Chapter 74. You and I are one step closer to the truth. 2 in 1. As everyone watched, the airship began to slowly descend, and soon hovered 40 meters above the square. All the wizards in the square and the townspeople with good eyesight could see the two balls hanging at the bottom of the airship. The former was about half a meter in diameter, made of metal, and pulled by a thick cowhide rope. The rope was so tight that it seemed that it would break at the next moment. The other ball was only 1/3 the size of the former. Even the naked eye could see the huge difference in quality between the two. Lin En waited until the sea breeze gradually weakened and the airship was truly hovering steadily before he picked up a red flag and shook it a few times. In the airship above, Lydia, who was standing on a stool and lying on the edge, also waved the flag in response. It started, Lin En said. Everyone's eyes were now focused on the two balls suspended at the bottom of the airship. As another wrench was pulled down by Lydia, the two ropes were immediately broken. 2 iron balls fell at the same time. The big one is faster. The big one is faster, the young wizard shouted excitedly. Under the effect of the far-sighted magic, he could clearly and accurately see that at the moment the rope broke, the big iron ball fell first. However, the excitement on the wizard's face was stuck on his face the next second, because after the big iron ball fell, it was not as fast as he expected, but kept a very close distance with the small iron ball. Rather than saying that the big iron ball fell faster, it would be better to explain that the rope that bound the big iron ball collapsed tighter, so it fell faster for a moment. Lin En was not worried from beginning to end, because he had carefully calculated the data of the 2 iron balls. Although the mass of the big ball was larger, its windward surface was also larger, and it would be subject to more wind resistance. Sure enough, in the second of falling, the heights of the big and small iron balls were still almost the same. This is impossible. This shouldn't be right. The faces of the wizards who saw this scene were full of disbelief. Some even suspected that it was Lin En who secretly cast the slow-falling spell on the big iron ball, which caused such an amazing effect. Just as they thought so, the huge iron ball weighing half a ton hit the square directly. Instantly, the whole square seemed to shake. The huge impact force made the big iron ball deeply embedded in the sand at the moment of falling. The surrounding quicksand was blown up by the force at the moment of falling, like continuous sand and stone rain scattering in all directions. The invisible magic barrier surrounded the center of the entire square, and the sand and stones hit the barrier continuously, making crackling sounds. Out of trust in the great wizard, not many people paid attention to the flying sand and stones, and they all stared at the 2 balls in the center of the square. The heavy iron ball had already hit the center of the square deeply, and the sand and stones that were pushed away formed an impact crater of about 3 meters in radius. The surrounding fine sand was still accumulating inside. Under the other small iron ball, the impact crater was only a few dozen centimeters in size and was soon filled with sand and stones. Just as Lin En had just said, the 2 spheres with a mass difference of dozens of times almost crossed a distance of 40 meters at the same time and reached the ground. But how is this possible? Shouldn't the heavier one land first? Professor Helram, can I confirm it? The young wizard asked anxiously. The great wizard did not answer, but turned his head to look at Lin En. Seeing the other party nod, he removed the magic barrier. The wizard immediately ran over, not minding that his ankles were stuck in the sand, and squatted down to pick up the small iron ball with a diameter of only a palm with one hand, and threw it by the way. It's really light, the wizard said thoughtfully, roughly estimating that the weight of the small ball was only about 20 kilograms, and there was no trace of magic on it. Could it be that there was something wrong with the larger iron ball? The unbelieving wizard immediately put down the small ball, squatted down and tried to lift the half-meter diameter iron ball, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't move it out of the sand. "Hiss, how heavy is this thing?" The young wizard couldn't help but be amazed. And then he was sure that the other party didn't cut corners. "If anyone still has doubts, you can go up and confirm it," Lin En said nonchalantly. With Lin En's approval, wizards and even townspeople who had doubts about this experiment stepped into the sand and used their own hands to personally check the weight difference between the two balls. Just as they saw visually, the difference between the two was dozens of times, and only a few shaping wizards could lift it. In the end, it was Helrim who used the mage's hand to pull the thing out of the sand and weighed it in his hand. About half a ton. Helrim pondered for a moment and made a relatively accurate judgment. Philip, Kevin, Theodore and others looked at each other, unable to hide their shock. What Lin En just said about the difference of tens of times in mass between the two was too conservative. This was already a difference of 25 times. But, it's too strange. Why is it like this? Luo'er looked at Lin En in confusion. He didn't care about the 3 gold coins he lost, but was very surprised by this phenomenon that violated common sense. He saw with his own eyes the horrible damage caused by the big iron ball when it fell to the ground. Its weight can be imagined, but the falling speed of the 2 iron balls was exactly the same. This is not magic at all. Let's make an assumption and we will know. Lin En looked at the puzzled eyes on the square and emphasized his tone. According to Master Yi's theory, the falling speed of an object is proportional to its weight. Isn't this correct? Luo'er and others nodded. Lin En changed his voice and pointed at the 2 spheres and spoke. "If I tie this small iron ball and the big iron ball together with a rope and drop them from a high altitude, do you think it will fall faster or slower?" "Of course it will fall faster, because the overall weight has increased," Luo'er answered without hesitation. But the next second, several wizards refuted. "No. It should be slower. The mass of the small ball is much lower than that of the big ball, and its landing speed is also much slower, so it will inevitably slow down the falling speed of the iron ball. If it takes 4 seconds for the big iron ball to fall and 9 seconds for the small ball, then if the 2 are tied together and dropped at the same time, the final landing time should be between 4 and 9 seconds. Before Lin En even replied, the wizards of the 2 factions had already quarreled. Johnny, Alok and others listened in and felt that what both sides said seemed to make sense, but they were contradictory. "The answer is, there is almost no change." Lin En interrupted the quarrel. "How can there be no change?" Philip frowned and scolded, but he paused as soon as he finished speaking, because the falling experiment just now proved this point. The falling speed of an object has nothing to do with weight, at least it is far less than they expected. "Mr. Roll, can you give me a blank piece of paper?" Lin En knew that many people present still had doubts, so he looked at Roll and asked. "Of course." Roll took out a piece of paper from his arms and handed it to Lin En, very curious about what he wanted to do. Lin En turned his head to look at the townspeople, holding up the paper. "Who can give me a book that is slightly wider than this piece of paper?" Amidst the noise, a child contributed his storybook. Lin En urged the mage's hand to send the piece of paper and the storybook to a height of 2 meters and let them fall together. The paper slowly floated in the air and fell to the ground after 4 seconds, while the storybook fell to the ground in just 1 second. "What are you doing?" Philip asked in confusion. "Doesn't this phenomenon just refute his theory?" Lin En did not answer, but gently placed the paper on the cover of the storybook, and then sent them up into the air again with the cover facing up, and said jokingly, "Come on. Guess. Now let them fall at the same time. Which one will land first?" "Do you still need to guess?" "There is no doubt that the paper is floating in the air and the book will land first," Philip said decisively. This time, both factions agreed with Philip's point of view, because Lin En did not tie the 2 together, so they could not be regarded as a whole. "Then it must be that the paper is slow and the book is fast. Then you have to watch carefully next." Lin En shook his head and directly lifted the magic. The next moment, what surprised everyone present was that the paper did not float up as everyone imagined, but just stuck to the cover of the book and fell with it. The whole process took only a short second, and the thin paper and the heavy book fell to the ground at the same time. The whole square fell into a deathly silence. They racked their brains and couldn't figure out why this happened. Reality undoubtedly shattered everyone's intuition again. Unless. It's really like Lin En said, the falling speed has nothing to do with weight. Did the air resistance disappear? Halram said thoughtfully. Of course he could see that because Lin En pasted the paper pages on a book. The thin paper didn't need to face the air resistance. And of course it would fall with the book. Roll, who didn't believe in evil, tried it again according to Lin En's method just now, and the result was still no change. Even the wizards who had the highest voice of opposition before had to consider a problem. Master Ye's theory might really be wrong. Your wisdom is commendable, Master Halram. It is because the book replaces the paper pages to bear the air resistance that they fall together. Lin En first praised Halram very naturally, and then looked at the wizards who had not yet recovered from the 2 falling experiments, and spoke again. When I was in the secret society, I heard a master say that this world is extremely magical, and sometimes some phenomena even exceed our cognition. The process of wizards exploring the truth is like a few blind people trying to replicate the image of a dragon in their minds by touching it. The person who touched the dragon's legs thought that the dragon looked like a cylinder, and the person who touched the wings thought that the dragon looked like a disc, flat and long. But there is no doubt that all these conclusions are one-sided. Maybe one day, another wizard will stand in this square and use a rigorous and irrefutable experiment to overturn this law of free fall. But I will never be angry about it. On the contrary, I welcome anyone to question it or repeatedly prove it through experiments, because every mistake that is corrected means that you and I have taken another step closer to the truth. Lin En's loud voice continued to echo in the square. After a very short silence, thunderous applause rang out. Tick. Philip and others were shocked by the 2 free-fall experiments that were beyond their imagination, and admired Lin En's broad mind. You have to know that in the wizard land, the dispute over ideas is no joke. Sometimes 2 schools will even fight to prove whose theory is correct. But Lin En actually went the other way and welcomed everyone to verify his theory through experiments. Such a broad mind is really admirable. The townspeople present also applauded together. Those knowledgeable people were sincere, but some people were confused. A short halfling looked at Darren, whose palms were almost red from clapping, and asked quietly, "Do you understand what they are saying, Darren?" "Isn't it simple? Master Ye's theory is wrong, and Mr. Lin En's theory is right." Darren had a disdainful expression on his face, but he was actually very guilty. He could barely understand wind resistance, gravity, etc., but he had no idea why paper could fall to the ground at the same time as a book. However, since those wizards applauded, it would be right for him to follow suit. Amidst the enthusiastic applause, the huge airship slowly landed on the sand. The lively halfling girl climbed down the ladder from the airship. When she saw everyone applauding and welcoming her, her eyes narrowed with joy. The Overlook's first test flight was successful. All the devices inside the airship are working properly. Captain Lydia requests the next instructions. Lydia trotted to Lin En, saluted in a pretentious manner, and said proudly, "There is no next instruction for the time being. Let's stop here for today." Lin En replied with a smile. Lydia immediately freed herself from the state of captain, and spoke excitedly about her experience in the sky, how she drove the airship and hit a white cloud, and the distant mountains and the endless sea. Thanks to book friends Poor Little Born for the 1,500 starting coins, Poor Little Born and Hold On to My Twin Ponytails for the 500 starting coins, Huang Yui for the 100 starting coins, and book friends 1605251915054411 and Old Watcher for the 2 starting coins. Chapter 75 Magic Level Assessment. Lydia was talking about her flying experience with great excitement, and the apprentices and townspeople were eager to try. Would it really be as refreshing to hit the clouds in the sky as being blown by the sea breeze? They all wanted to experience this wonderful feeling. 10 silver coins didn't seem to be very expensive. The halfling girl said a lot of things, and when she saw Halram, she remembered the purpose of this flight and asked anxiously, "Master Halram, this time it should be considered a success, right?" "I stayed in the sky for a long time without using any magic." Halram stared at Lydia, hesitated for a while, and did not reply. My Olympiad class does not require magical talent. Even an ordinary person can gain a lot of knowledge from it. Lin En also helped at this time. In that case, let's give it a try, Helram said without comment. Great. Lydia jumped up happily, turned around and hugged several halflings, and Darren burst into tears, unable to restrain his excitement. I knew you could do it, Lydia. Great. The halflings will soon have a wizard of their own. Darren and the others were too excited and decided to get drunk when they returned home tonight. Some wizards and students gathered in the square frowned as they watched Lydia and the others making noises. It was the first time that a halfling with no magical talent was admitted to the school, and it was also against the rules of the Wizard Council. However, with the shock brought by the flight experiment and Helram's approval, no one dared to refute it openly. After a while of noise, Helram cast a spell to restore the ground that had turned into sand, and ordered several wizards to maintain order in the square, and then took a group of professors and students back to Ida College to prepare to entertain the two distinguished guests from the Wizard City. Lydia and the others who stayed in the square were happy, and they did not forget to take advantage of this popularity to sell airship tickets. According to Lin En's previous pricing, the ticket to board the airship is 10 silver coins each, which is not too high or too low, and most townspeople can afford it with a little effort. In view of this, many people are willing to spend money to board the airship and take a stroll in the sky on the alchemy machine in front of them that is taller than a building. In just half an hour, Lydia has sold more than 600 so-called tickets. Adhering to the concept of first come first served, everyone's name is recorded, and it is impossible to evade the ticket. The interior of this airship is quite spacious, and it is not a problem to carry 10 people at a time. Each time it flies in the sky for about an hour. It can fly at least 10 times a day, but even so, it takes several days to line up. It only took a short while to get more than 60 magic gold coins. Darren and others were grinning from ear to ear. You know, Lin En is willing to give them 1/10 of the ticket sales money as operating expenses. According to such popularity, it is not easy for them to share dozens of magic gold coins every month. This is much more cost-effective than hiring coolies in the workshop to make those gadgets. While Darren and the others were caught up in the fantasy of a better life, in the Ida Academy, Helram, Tick, Roll and a group of professors had already arrived at the front hall. Groups of goblins flew in from the window and placed plates of hot delicacies on the square table in front of everyone. Roasted tomatoes, mashed potatoes, white bread, the tailbone of herbivorous lizards, the spine of camels, the front legs of fire lions, and many strange ingredients that Lin En couldn't recognize at all. Lin En carefully cut off a small piece of front leg meat and put it in his mouth. It seemed that this thing seemed to be more flavorful than beef. Although it was far from delicious due to the lack of seasoning, it was already a very rich delicacy in the wizarding land. Professor Lin En, I have to thank you for letting me see such an interesting airship and falling body experiment as soon as I arrived at the Ida harbor. I'm afraid that Magic Weekly will not lack news in the next month. Roll raised his glass, looked at Lin En, and said jokingly, Mr. Lwoer, you are too kind. I have to ask you to be lenient when writing the manuscript, and try to be more tactful when expressing your opinions. Lin En raised his glass and drank it all, and said politely, he was naturally aware of the power of the pen. The other party only needed to express his opinions more radically in Magic Weekly to cause him a lot of trouble. That won't work. I must truthfully report everything I see. This is the most basic ethics of being an editor of Magic Weekly. Lwoer shook his head and said very tactfully. Lin En was speechless. He never believed that a media person would have such a thing as ethics. This thing does not exist at all. However, the other party was unwilling to make a guarantee, and he had no choice. By the way, Professor Lin En, I have another doubt. Lwoer stopped shaking the glass and asked curiously, what level of wizard are you? Hearing this, everyone present looked over at the same time, and they were all very curious about this question. Theodore, Kevin and others who knew some inside information all guessed that Lin En must be a 3-ring wizard. After all, the other party killed an archbishop, destroyed half of the town and a full 3,000 guards. Even with the help of some alchemical items that needed to be prepared in advance, It was already extremely powerful. But the only thing that made them doubtful was that Lin En looked too young, perhaps less than 20 years old. You know, as the most famous genius in the wizard land, star of the magic world, Just was also promoted to a 3-ring wizard on his 20th birthday. Under the gaze of countless eyes, Lin En slowly drank the red wine in the glass and said very calmly, "Let's wait until Mr. Tick has determined the wizard level for me. The detection method of the wizard land may be different from that of the Secret Law Society." Seeing that Lin En was keeping it a secret, the professors became more curious. However, they could still wait for this time. It wouldn't take much time to have a meal, right? Lin En slowly put down the wine glass in his hand, his face expressionless, but he was slightly worried. Although he had never personally admitted that he was a formal wizard, and he used the title of scholar when introducing himself, there was no doubt that everyone present regarded him as a formal wizard. If something went wrong during the test, it would be troublesome. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.